When cowboy Ethan Cole finds a woman barely breathing under the brutal summer sun, he has no idea that saving her life will destroy everything he knows. Lydia Moore carries secrets worth killing for, secrets that powerful men will burn cities to bury. Now, with hired guns on their trail and a noose waiting in Sacramento, two strangers must trust each other completely or die alone. Stay with me until the end, hit like, and comment your city. Let me see how far this story travels. The summer of 1873 came to California like a punishment. Ethan Cole had been riding since before dawn, pushing his horse through the kind of heat that turned the air itself into something you could taste, dust and sage, and the faint metallic tang of a sky that refused to offer rain. The trail from Sacramento stretched empty in both directions, a ribbon of pale dirt cutting through golden hills that shimmered and danced in the distance. Grasshoppers erupted from the brush with each step of his horse's hooves, and somewhere far off, a hawk circled in lazy spirals, waiting for something to die. He was 3 days out from selling his cattle, his saddlebags heavy with payment, his mind already turning toward home. The ranch waited. 200 acres of hard-won land in the foothills, a house he'd built with his own hands, a life carved from nothing but stubbornness and sweat. At 34, Ethan had learned to want simple things: a good horse, honest work, silence when he needed it. The body appeared as a dark shape against the pale road, and at first he thought it was a deer. He pulled his horse to a stop, squinting against the glare. The shape didn't move. Vultures hadn't found it yet, which meant whatever it was hadn't been there long. Ethan sat motionless in his saddle, scanning the hills on either side, looking for movement, for the glint of metal, for any sign that this was what it looked like. Bait in a trap. Nothing moved except the heat. He urged his horse forward slowly, one hand resting on the rifle across his saddle. 20 feet away, he saw the dress. Calico. Torn. Stained dark with something that wasn't dirt. 10 feet away, he saw the hair. Brown, tangled, spread across the ground like something spilled. 5 feet away, he saw the blood. So much blood. Ethan dismounted in a single motion, ground-tying his horse without thinking. The woman lay face down, her arms twisted at angles that spoke of violence, her back rising and falling in shallow, desperate breaths. Alive. Barely. He knelt beside her, and the smell hit him, copper and fear, and something else. Something that reminded him of battlefields he'd tried to forget. Her dress had been torn open at the back, revealing skin mottled with bruises in shades of purple and black and sickly yellow. Someone had beaten her with focused, methodical cruelty. Someone had meant for her to suffer before she died. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" A sound escaped her, not quite a word, not quite a moan. Her fingers twitched against the dirt. Ethan reached out to touch her shoulder, and she came alive. The scream that tore from her throat was raw and animal and utterly terrifying. She twisted away from him with strength that shouldn't have been possible, scrambling backward on hands and knees, leaving smears of blood across the pale road. Her eyes, one swollen, nearly shut, the other wide with terror, fixed on him with the look of a creature that had learned what men could do. "Don't," she gasped. "Don't touch me. Don't." "Easy." Ethan raised both hands, palms out, and stayed perfectly still. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not the one who did this." She pressed herself against a boulder at the road's edge, her chest heaving, her broken lips pulled back from teeth stained pink with blood. The dress hung from her shoulders in tatters. Beneath the dirt and the damage, he could see that she was young, mid-20s maybe. That she had been beautiful before someone decided to destroy her. "My name is Ethan Cole," he said, still not moving. "I have a ranch about half a day's ride from here. I have water, I have food, I have medicine." "You're going to die if you stay out here. You know that, don't you?" Her breathing came in sharp, shallow gasps. She didn't answer. "I'm going to reach very slowly into my saddlebag," Ethan continued. "I'm going to get my canteen. I'm going to set it on the ground between us. Then I'm going to step back. All right?" Still no answer, but she didn't scream again. He moved with exaggerated slowness, every motion telegraphed, every gesture small and unthreatening. The canteen landed in the dirt with a soft thud. He retreated 5 paces and crouched down, making himself smaller, less imposing. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then thirst won over fear. She lunged for the canteen with desperate, clumsy hands, fumbling with the cap, tilting it to her swollen lips. Water spilled down her chin, mixing with blood, dripping onto the ruined dress. She drank like someone who had been crawling through the desert for days, like someone who had given up on being found. "Slow down," Ethan said. "You'll make yourself sick." She ignored him, drinking until the canteen was empty, then clutching it against her chest as if it were something precious. Her one good eye watched him over the rim, tracking his every breath. "Who did this to you?" he asked. She laughed, a broken, terrible sound. "You wouldn't believe me." "Try." But she shook her head, and something in her face changed. The terror was still there, but beneath it, he caught a glimpse of something harder, something that had survived. "I need to get off this road," she said. "They'll come back. They always come back to make sure." "Who?" "Please." The word cracked in the middle. "Please, I can't explain right now. I just need to get somewhere they can't find me. Somewhere I can think." Ethan studied her for a long moment, the desperation in her voice, the calculation behind the fear. This wasn't a random attack. This wasn't bandits or bad luck. This was something else entirely. "Can you stand?" he asked. She tried. Her legs buckled immediately, and she caught herself on the boulder, a cry of pain escaping through clenched teeth. "I'm going to help you onto my horse," Ethan said. "I'll walk beside you. I won't touch you any more than I have to, but we need to move. You're right. We shouldn't be here when the sun goes down." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he could see her making the calculation. Stranger, man, danger, but also water, safety, survival, the arithmetic of desperation. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help me?" It was a good question. Ethan had spent the last 10 years learning to mind his own business, to keep his head down, to avoid the entanglements that had cost him so much during the war. He had built a life specifically designed to keep other people's troubles at a distance. But he looked at this woman, beaten and bloody and fighting to stay alive, and something in his chest shifted. "Because leaving you here would make me the kind of man I swore I'd never be," he said. "And because whatever you're running from, it's not going to catch you today. Not on my watch." She stared at him for 3 heartbeats, 4, 5. Then she nodded. Getting her onto the horse was an exercise in controlled agony. Every movement brought a fresh gasp of pain. Every touch made her flinch like she expected a blow. But she gritted her teeth and endured, and Ethan found himself respecting her for it. Whatever had happened to her, it hadn't broken her. Not completely. He led the horse off the main road, choosing trails that wound through the hills, paths he'd learned over years of avoiding the traffic that flowed between Sacramento and the coast. The woman, she still hadn't told him her name, slumped in the saddle, barely conscious, her fingers tangled in the horse's mane. "Stay with me," Ethan said over his shoulder. "Talk to me. Tell me something." "What?" "Anything. Your name. Thing. Where you're from. What color the sky was when you were a little girl. Just keep talking so I know you're still alive." A long pause. Then, "Lydia." "Lydia what?" "Moore. Lydia Moore." She said it like a confession, like she expected him to recognize it. He didn't. "Where are you from, Lydia Moore?" "Sacramento. Originally, but I've been a lot of places since then." "Running?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. They rode in silence for a while, the sun tracking across the sky, the shadows lengthening across the trail. Ethan kept checking the horizon, kept listening for hoofbeats, kept waiting for whoever had done this to emerge from the golden hills with guns drawn. But the land stayed empty. Whatever monsters were hunting Lydia Moore, they weren't here yet. The ranch appeared as the sun touched the western mountains, a cluster of buildings in a small valley, sheltered by oaks and fed by a creek that ran year-round even in drought. The house was simple but solid, 2 stories of weathered wood and stone with a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The barn stood 50 yards away, and beyond it, the corrals where Ethan's cattle waited to be moved to summer pasture. "Home," he said quietly. Lydia lifted her head, and for a moment the pain in her face gave way to something else. Surprise, maybe. Or wonder. As if she'd expected to die on that road and couldn't quite believe she'd made it anywhere at all. He helped her down from the horse, catching her when her legs gave out, and half-carried her to the porch. The front door was unlocked. It always was. Ethan had never seen the point in locking doors. Until today, he'd never had anything worth protecting. The inside of the house was cool and dim, the curtains drawn against the summer heat. He settled Lydia onto the sofa in the main room, supporting her head, covering her with a blanket despite the warmth. Her skin was pale beneath the bruises, her breathing shallow and rapid. "I need to look at your injuries," he said. "I have some medical supplies. I was a field surgeon's assistant during the war. I know what I'm doing." She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "No hospitals, no doctors. Promise me." "I promise. Just me." She held his gaze for a long moment, then released him with a nod. The next hour was difficult. Lydia's injuries were extensive. 3 broken ribs, deep bruising across her back and stomach, cuts on her arms and face that needed cleaning and stitching. Whoever had beaten her had done so with terrible precision, targeting places where the damage wouldn't be immediately fatal, but would cause maximum suffering. This wasn't anger, this was expertise. She bore it all in silence, her jaw clenched, her hands fisted in the blanket. Only once did she make a sound. When Ethan set her ribs, she screamed through her teeth, a muffled cry of agony that made his stomach turn. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry. It's almost over." "Just finish it." When he was done, she lay with her eyes closed, her face gray and sheened with sweat. He covered her with a fresh blanket and pulled a chair close to the sofa. "You need to sleep," he said. "I'll be right here. No one's getting through that door without going through me first." "You don't know what you're offering," she whispered. "Then tell me." But sleep was already claiming her, pulling her down into darkness. Her breathing evened out, grew deeper, and within minutes she was unconscious. Ethan sat beside her through the long evening, watching the light fade from the windows, listening to the sounds of his ranch settling into night. He thought about the woman on his sofa, about the precision of her injuries, about the fear in her voice when she talked about them coming back. He thought about the life he'd built, quiet, safe, predictable. And he knew, with the certainty of a man who had seen too much of the world to believe in coincidence, that nothing would be quiet or safe or predictable ever again. Outside, the first stars were appearing, cold and distant above the California hills. Somewhere in the darkness, something howled. A coyote, maybe, or just the wind. Ethan checked his rifle, checked the locks on the doors and windows, then returned to his chair beside the sofa. "What have you gotten yourself into, Ethan Cole?" he murmured. Lydia stirred in her sleep, murmuring something he couldn't catch. Her hand reached out, grasping at empty air, and without thinking, he took it in his own. Her fingers tightened around his, holding on like a drowning woman to a piece of driftwood. He stayed like that through the night, her hand in his, standing guard over a woman whose secrets he didn't know against enemies he couldn't see. And somewhere in the small hours, as the moon traced its arc across the sky, Ethan Cole made a decision. Whatever trouble Lydia Moore had brought to his door, he would face it. Whatever darkness followed her, he would stand against it. Not because he knew her, not because he owed her anything, but because some things were worth fighting for, even when you didn't know what they were yet. Especially then. She slept for 2 days. Ethan checked on her every few hours, changing her bandages, spooning water between her cracked lips, watching for signs of fever or infection. The bruises on her face shifted from purple to green to sickly yellow, the swelling slowly receding, revealing features that were delicate and fine-boned beneath the damage. When she wasn't thrashing through nightmares, she looked almost peaceful. The nightmares came every night, though. Sometimes she called out names he didn't recognize, Thomas, Margaret, someone called Bennett. Sometimes she begged, her voice thin and desperate. "Please, I didn't do it. I didn't kill anyone." Sometimes she just screamed. On the third morning, Ethan was in the kitchen making coffee when he heard movement from the main room. He poured a second cup and carried both to the doorway. Lydia was sitting up, the blanket pooled around her waist, her eyes tracking him with the wariness of a wild animal. In the morning light, he could see that her good eye was a clear pale blue, the color of a winter sky. The swollen eye had begun to open, revealing a match. "Coffee," he said, setting one cup on the table beside the sofa. "It's not fancy, but it's hot." She didn't move to take it. "How long?" "2 days. A little more." "Anyone come?" "No, just the wind and the coyotes." Something in her shoulders relaxed, just slightly. "You've been watching over me this whole time?" "Someone had to." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he had the uncomfortable sensation of being assessed, evaluated, weighed against some internal standard. "Why?" she asked again. "Why are you doing this?" "You already asked me that." "You didn't really answer." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, cradling his coffee. "I spent 3 years in a war watching men do terrible things to each other. After it was over, I promised myself I'd never stand by while someone suffered if I could do something about it." "You were suffering. I did something. That's all there is to it." "That's a good speech," Lydia said. "But you don't know what I've done, what I'm accused of." "You mentioned something while you were sleeping, something about not killing anyone." Her face went very still. "What else did I say?" "Names: Thomas, Margaret, Bennett." She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "Thomas was my brother. Margaret was his wife. They're dead because of me, because of what I found out." "Tell me." Lydia reached for the coffee, wrapping both hands around the cup as if drawing warmth from it. She took a sip, grimaced, took another. "It's a long story. I'm not going anywhere." She studied him over the rim of the cup, that same assessing look. Then she seemed to make a decision. "I worked as a bookkeeper," she began, "for a company called Pacific Union Holdings. They had offices in Sacramento, San Francisco, all up and down the coast. Investment firm, mostly. They helped wealthy men put their money into railroads, mining operations, land speculation. Very respectable. Very profitable." She paused, gathering herself. 3 months ago, I found discrepancies in the accounts. Small things at first, payments that didn't match invoices, expenses that couldn't be verified. I thought it was a mistake. I thought I could fix it. But it wasn't a mistake. No. Lydia's voice hardened. It was fraud. Massive, systematic fraud. They were taking money from investors, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and funneling it into shell companies, fake operations, paper enterprises that existed only to move money from one pocket to another. Some of the most powerful men in California were involved. Judges, politicians, a United States senator. Ethan let out a low whistle. "And you found proof? Ledgers, correspondence, account records going back 5 years, enough to put a dozen men in prison and destroy 100 reputations." She looked at him directly. "I made copies, hid them, told my brother what I'd found. And then? Then they came." Her voice caught. "Thomas and Margaret. They came to visit me in Sacramento. We were going to go to the authorities together, but someone must have been watching. Someone must have known." She stopped speaking. Her hands were shaking, the coffee sloshing against the sides of the cup. "They killed them," Ethan said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Made it look like a robbery. Shot them both in Thomas's hotel room, took their money, their jewelry. But they weren't after valuables. They were sending a message." Lydia's jaw tightened. "To me. And the murder charge? They're saying I did it, that I killed my own brother and his wife for their inheritance, that I fled Sacramento to escape justice." A bitter laugh escaped her. "The story's in all the papers by now. Lydia Moore, murderer and thief. There's probably a bounty on my head." Ethan processed this, turning it over in his mind. The bruises, the precision of the beating, the desperation in her voice when she talked about them coming back. "How did they find you?" he asked. "If you ran, how did they catch up?" "I was stupid. I went back for the evidence, the copies I'd made. I had them hidden in a safe deposit box at a bank in Stockton. Someone was watching, waiting." Her hand rose unconsciously to touch her swollen face. "They wanted to know where the rest of the copies were. The originals. I wouldn't tell them. So they beat you. For 2 days. Different men, taking turns, very professional. They were going to kill me when they were done. Dump my body somewhere and tell the papers that the fugitive had been found. Case closed." "But you escaped." One of them got careless, left a knife too close while he was occupied. Her voice went flat, empty. I got the knife, got the door, got out, ran until I couldn't run anymore. She looked down at her hands. That's when you found me. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the weight of what she'd told him. This wasn't just a woman running from bad men. This was a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of California society. Men with money, with power, with influence. Men who could make murder look like robbery and turn a bookkeeper into a fugitive. Men who would kill anyone who got in their way. The evidence, he said finally. You said you made copies. Where are they? Lydia's eyes met his, and he saw the fear there, but also the calculation. She was deciding whether to trust him, weighing her options, measuring the risk. If I tell you that, she said, you become part of this. You become someone they'll need to silence. I think I became that the moment I picked you up off that road. You could still walk away. Ride into town, tell the sheriff where I am, collect the reward. No one would blame you. Would you? She didn't answer, but her eyes said everything. Ethan set down his coffee cup and crossed the room to stand before her. Up close, she looked impossibly fragile, bruised and battered and barely holding herself together. But there was steel underneath the damage. He could see it in the set of her jaw, the steadiness of her gaze. I'm not going to turn you in, he said. I'm not going to walk away. Whatever happens next, we face it together. Why? The word was barely a whisper. Because they killed your brother. Because they beat you half to death. Because somewhere in Sacramento there are men who think they're above the law, who think they can hurt whoever they want, take whatever they want, and never face consequences. His voice hardened. And because I've spent too long sitting on this ranch pretending the world's ugliness couldn't touch me. It's time I stopped pretending. Lydia stared at him, and something shifted in her expression. The wariness didn't disappear. He suspected it might never disappear entirely, but beneath it, he saw something new. Hope, maybe. Or something like it. San Francisco, she said quietly. The originals are in San Francisco. I gave them to someone I trusted, someone who promised to keep them safe until I could figure out what to do. Who? A journalist, Marcus Webb. He works for the Chronicle. He's been investigating Pacific Union Holdings for months. Suspected something was wrong but couldn't prove it. I gave him enough proof to bring down an empire. Then why haven't the stories been published? Because I told him to wait. I wanted to be sure I was safe first. Wanted to make sure my family couldn't be used as leverage against me. Her voice broke. I didn't know they'd already gotten to Thomas. I didn't know I was too late. Ethan knelt before her, bringing himself to her eye level. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to rest. You're going to heal. And when you're strong enough to travel, we're going to San Francisco together. We're going to find this Marcus Webb, and we're going to make sure those stories get published. We're going to burn their empire to the ground. They'll come for us. They won't stop. Let them come. He met her eyes, steady and sure. I've faced worse odds than a few corrupt businessmen and their hired guns, and I've never had anything worth fighting for before. Now I do. Lydia searched his face for a long moment, looking for deception, for doubt, for the betrayal she'd learned to expect from everyone. She found none. You're either very brave or very foolish, she said. Probably both. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. My mother always said I never could resist a lost cause. I'm not a lost cause. No, Ethan agreed. You're not. You're the woman who's going to bring down the most powerful men in California. And I'm the man who's going to help you do it. For the first time since he'd found her on that road, Lydia Moore smiled. It was small, fragile, barely more than a trembling of her lips, but it transformed her face, hinting at the woman she'd been before the world had tried to break her. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. We've got a long way to go. But something had changed between them in that moment. Something fundamental and irreversible. Two strangers, bound together by circumstance and choice, about to walk into a storm that would test everything they had. Outside, the sun was climbing over the hills, burning away the morning mist, painting the valley in shades of gold and green. It was going to be another brutal summer day. But inside the ranch house, in the space between a damaged woman and the man who had chosen to save her, something cooler stirred. Something like hope. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Ethan rose before dawn to tend his cattle, to check fences, to do the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch running. Lydia slept late, her body demanding rest, her mind fighting nightmares that left her hollow-eyed and shaking. But each day, she grew a little stronger. Each day, the bruises faded a little more. She started helping around the house. Small things at first, tasks she could do while sitting down. Mending clothes, cleaning vegetables for dinner, organizing the chaos of Ethan's kitchen, which had fallen into bachelor disarray over the years. She moved carefully, favoring her ribs, but there was purpose in her movements, determination in the set of her shoulders. "You don't have to do that," Ethan said one afternoon, finding her elbow deep in soapy water, scrubbing a stack of plates. "I know." She didn't stop. "But I need to feel useful. I need to feel like I'm doing something besides hiding." He understood that. The helplessness of waiting, the way it ate at you from the inside. He'd felt it during the war, stuck in a field hospital while battles raged. Nothing to do but patch up the wounded and wait for more. "At least let me dry," he said, picking up a towel. They worked in companionable silence, the late afternoon light slanting through the kitchen window, dust motes dancing in the golden beams. It was peaceful, Ethan thought. Domestic. The kind of moment he'd given up hoping for. "Tell me about this place," Lydia said. "How did you end up here?" "After the war, I drifted for a while. Worked as a ranch hand in Texas, then Arizona. Saved every penny I earned. When I had enough, I came north, looking for land that wasn't already claimed. Found this valley by accident, got lost in a storm, stumbled into it, knew immediately it was where I wanted to be. It's beautiful. It's home." He handed her a dried plate to stack. "I built the house myself, took 2 years. Every night I'd come in exhausted, hands bleeding, muscles screaming. But I kept going. Because for the first time in my life, I was building something that was mine. No family, no wife. My parents died when I was young, raised by an uncle who wasn't much interested in raising anyone. As for a wife, he shrugged. Never seemed to happen. I'm not an easy man to know, I suppose. Too quiet. Too set in my ways." Lydia looked at him sideways, something unreadable in her expression. "I don't think you're difficult to know at all. I think you're the most straightforward person I've ever met." "Is that a compliment?" "In my experience, yes. In my world, everyone has an angle. Everyone wants something. You just don't." "I want plenty of things," Ethan said. "I'm just too stubborn to scheme for them." She laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and the sound did something strange to his chest, made it feel tight and expansive at the same time. "Tell me about your world," he said. "Before all this, what was your life like?" The laughter faded, but something softer remained. "I grew up in Sacramento. My father was a schoolteacher, my mother a seamstress. We didn't have much, but we had enough. Thomas was older by 5 years. He always looked out for me, even when we were children. You miss him." "Every moment." Her voice caught, but she pushed through. "He married Margaret 3 years ago. She was a nurse, kind and practical, and exactly right for him. They were talking about having children, starting a family. And now they're gone because you tried to do the right thing." Lydia set down the dish she'd been washing, her hands going still in the water. "Do you know what the worst part is? I keep wondering if I should have just kept quiet. If I'd never found those ledgers, never started asking questions, Thomas and Margaret would still be alive. I'd still have a life. Maybe ignorance really is bliss. And the men who stole that money? The investors who were cheated? The other people they might hurt in the future? I know all the arguments. I know it was the right thing to do." She turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with tears she refused to shed. "But my brother is dead, Ethan. My sister-in-law is dead. And I'm hiding in a stranger's kitchen, wanted for murders I didn't commit. How am I supposed to believe that any of this was worth it?" Ethan set down his towel and took her hands, gently, giving her time to pull away if she needed to. She didn't. "I can't tell you it was worth it," he said. "I don't know if it was." The only thing I know is that you can't go back. Can't undo what's been done. All you can do is move forward. Find the justice your brother deserved. Make sure his death meant something. And if I fail, then you fail having tried. That's more than most people can say. She held his gaze for a long moment, searching for something. Then slowly she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his chest. He felt her shoulders begin to shake. Silent sobs. Grief too long suppressed, finally finding release. Ethan held her, said nothing. Let her cry until she was empty, until the tears ran dry and she stood quiet and still against him, breathing slow and deep. "I'm sorry," she whispered finally. "I don't usually—" "Don't apologize. Not for that. Not ever for that." She pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. The tears had left tracks through the dust on her cheeks, but beneath them, he could see strength reassembling itself, walls going back up. "We should finish these dishes," she said. "We should." They worked in silence after that, but something had shifted between them. A barrier had fallen, and in the quiet of the ranch house kitchen, with the summer sun painting the world in gold outside the windows, Ethan Cole realized he was in very serious trouble. Because somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing Lydia Moore as a responsibility, and started seeing her as something far more dangerous. The riders came at dusk on the 7th day. Ethan was on the porch, smoking his pipe, watching the stars emerge from the darkening sky. Lydia was inside, reading by lamplight, her ribs finally healed enough to let her sit comfortably for long stretches. It had been a peaceful week, too peaceful, Ethan thought. He'd started to let his guard down. He saw the dust first, a cloud rising from the road that led into the valley, catching the last light of day like a column of red smoke. Then the shapes emerged, 3 riders, moving at a steady pace, making no effort to conceal their approach. "Lydia," he called, keeping his voice level. "Come here." She appeared in the doorway, saw the direction of his gaze, and went very still. "How did they find me?" she whispered. "Doesn't matter. What matters is what we do now." He knocked his pipe against the porch rail, scattering ashes. "Go inside. Stay away from the windows. If things go bad, there's a cellar door in the kitchen. It leads to a tunnel that comes out behind the barn. Follow the creek north. Don't stop until you reach Milford. Ask for a man named Samuel Pierce. Tell him Ethan sent you. I'm not leaving you. If they're here to kill us, they'll do it whether you're standing beside me or not. If there's any chance of talking our way out of this, I need you hidden. Understood?" She wanted to argue. He could see it in her face, but she nodded and disappeared inside. Ethan took a deep breath, checked the pistol at his hip, and walked off the porch to meet his visitors. The 3 men pulled up 20 feet from the house. 2 of them were typical hired muscle, hard-faced men with the look of professional violence, their hands resting easy on their gun belts. The third was different, older, perhaps 50, with silver hair and the kind of calm confidence that came from never doubting his own power. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Ethan's entire herd. "Evening," Ethan said. "Help you gentlemen with something?" The older man smiled, a practiced expression that never reached his eyes. "We're looking for someone. A woman. Dark hair, blue eyes. About 5'5". We have reason to believe she may have passed through this area. Lots of women pass through this area. It's a free country. This particular woman is wanted for murder. 2 counts. She's dangerous, unstable, capable of anything." The smile widened. "We're here to help, to bring her to justice." "And you are?" "My name is Harrison Webb." He said it like Ethan should recognize it. When no recognition came, a flicker of irritation crossed his face. "I represent Pacific Union Holdings. The woman we're looking for stole sensitive company documents before she committed her crimes. We're offering a substantial reward for information leading to her capture." "How substantial?" $5,000. It was an enormous sum, more than most men earned in a decade. Ethan let himself look impressed. "That's a lot of money for a bookkeeper." "She's not just a bookkeeper. She's a murderer and a thief. The documents she stole could damage the reputation of many innocent people if they fell into the wrong hands." "I see." Ethan hooked his thumbs into his belt, keeping his posture relaxed. "Well, Mr. Webb, I appreciate you stopping by. Haven't seen anyone matching that description, but I'll certainly keep my eyes open. Where should I send word if she turns up? The silver-haired man's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his eyes, something cold and calculating. Perhaps we could look around, he said, just to be thorough. We've been searching for days, and your ranch is the only habitation for miles. She must have found shelter somewhere. You're welcome to look at the barn, the outbuildings, but the house is my home. I don't let strangers inside. Even for $5,000? Especially for $5,000. That kind of money makes men do things they'd rather not do. I prefer to keep my conscience clear. The two hired guns exchanged glances. Their hands moved slightly closer to their weapons. Mr. Cole, isn't it? Webb said. Ethan Cole, former Union soldier, former field surgeon's assistant, bachelor, lives alone, keeps to himself. He paused, letting the information sink in. A man like you has no reason to get involved in matters that don't concern him. No reason to risk everything he's built for a woman he doesn't know. You've done your research. I do my research on everyone. It's how I've become successful. Webb's voice hardened. I'll ask one more time. Have you seen the woman we're looking for? Ethan held his gaze for a long moment. Then he smiled. No, he said. Can't say that I have. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken threat. Then Webb nodded slowly. Very well, we'll be going. He gathered his reins. But Mr. Cole, if you're lying to me, if you're hiding something, I will find out. And when I do, no one will ever find your body. Appreciate the warning. Ethan's hand rested easy on his pistol grip. You gentlemen have a safe ride. They turned and rode back the way they'd come, their dust cloud rising into the darkening sky. Ethan watched them until they disappeared over the hill. Then he stood there for another long minute, watching the stars emerge, listening for hoofbeats, waiting. Finally, he turned and walked back to the house. Lydia was in the kitchen, standing exactly where he'd told her not to stand, right by the window. They'll be back, she said. I know. We can't stay here. I know that too. She turned to face him, and in the lamplight, her expression was fierce and determined. Then we leave tonight. We go to San Francisco. We find Marcus Webb, and we end this. Webb, Ethan said slowly. The journalist. What's his full name? Marcus Webb. And the man who just left. His name was Harrison Webb. Lydia's face went pale. That can't be a coincidence. No, Ethan agreed. It can't be. He thought of the silver-haired man's confidence, his detailed knowledge of Ethan's background, the ease with which he'd issued his threats, thought of a journalist in San Francisco holding evidence that could destroy an empire. How well do you know this Marcus Webb? He asked. Not well. We only met twice. He seemed genuine, passionate about the truth. Does he have family, brothers? I don't. She stopped, horror dawning in her eyes. Oh, no, 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 no. It might be nothing, might be a different family entirely. But if it's not, if Marcus is related to Harrison, then the evidence you gave him might not be safe. Lydia sank into a chair, her face in her hands. I trusted him. I trusted him with everything. We don't know anything yet, but we need to find out. Ethan crossed to the window, looking out at the night. Can you ride? My ribs are still sore, but yes. Then pack what you need. Light, only what you can carry. We leave in an hour. She looked up at him, and beneath the fear he saw that steel again, that unbreakable core that had survived beatings and betrayal and everything else the world had thrown at her. I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry I brought this to your door. Don't be. He met her eyes, steady and sure. I told you we'd face this together. I meant it. Even now, even knowing what you're walking into? Especially now. He smiled, a thin, hard expression that had nothing to do with humor. I've been waiting for a fight worth fighting. Looks like I finally found one. Outside, the night deepened, and somewhere in the darkness, men were making plans to silence them forever. But in the ranch house in the valley, two people were making plans of their own. They would ride to San Francisco. They would find the truth, and one way or another, they would see justice done, or die trying. They rode through the night, keeping to trails that wound through the hills like secrets whispered between mountains. The moon hung low and fat above them, casting silver light across the landscape, turning every shadow into a potential threat. Ethan led the way on his buckskin gelding, with Lydia following close behind on the mare he kept for emergencies, a sturdy paint horse named Clara who had never failed him. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that the darkness didn't already know. By dawn, they had put 15 miles between themselves and the ranch, following the creek north before cutting west toward the coast road. Ethan knew these hills like he knew his own heartbeat. Every ridge, every hollow, every place where a man could hide and watch the world go by without being seen. He had spent years learning this land, never imagining he would need that knowledge to run for his life. "We should rest," he said finally, as the first pink light touched the eastern sky. "The horses need water and we need to think." They stopped in a small canyon where a spring bubbled up from the rocks, surrounded by oak trees that provided cover from anyone who might be watching from above. Ethan helped Lydia down from her horse, noting the way she winced as her feet touched the ground. The ride had been hard on her healing ribs. "How bad?" he asked. "I'll survive." She moved to the spring and knelt beside it, cupping water in her hands and drinking deeply. "I've survived worse." Ethan watered the horses and then sat down on a flat rock, pulling dried meat and hardtack from his saddlebag. It wasn't much of a breakfast, but it would keep them moving. "Tell me more about Marcus Webb," he said, handing her a portion. "Everything you remember. How you met him, what he said, what he looked like." Lydia chewed slowly, organizing her thoughts. "I found him through his articles. He'd written several pieces about corruption in California politics. Nothing major, nothing that named names, but you could tell he knew more than he was printing. I wrote to him, told him I had information about Pacific Union Holdings. He agreed to meet." "Where?" "A hotel in Oakland. He was younger than I expected, maybe 30, 35. Brown hair, glasses, nervous energy, like he couldn't sit still. He took notes while I talked, asked questions that showed he'd already been investigating on his own." "And you trusted him?" "I was desperate." She looked at him directly. "Thomas was already dead. Margaret was already dead. The men who killed them were looking for me, and I had evidence that could destroy them, but no way to make it public. Marcus Webb was my only chance." "So you gave him everything?" "Copies. The most damning documents, ledgers showing the money transfers, correspondence between Harrison Webb and Senator Morrison, bank records from the shell companies, enough to prove fraud on a massive scale." Ethan turned this over in his mind. "And he said he would publish?" "He said he needed time. Said a story this big required corroboration, multiple sources, legal review. He wanted to make sure it would stick, that they couldn't dismiss it as the ravings of a fugitive." Her voice tightened. "He said he'd contact me when it was ready. That was 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks, and nothing? "I was running. I couldn't exactly check my mail." She set down the hardtack, her appetite gone. "But now, knowing that Harrison Webb came to your ranch personally, knowing he has the same name as the journalist I trusted with everything, we need to know if they're related." "And if they are?" Ethan met her eyes. "Then we need to get that evidence back, or find another way to make it public." The sun was climbing higher now, warming the canyon, burning away the last of the night's chill. Somewhere above them, a hawk called, a sharp, lonely sound that echoed off the rocks. "There's something else," Lydia said quietly. "Something I didn't tell you before." Ethan waited. The fraud, the money they were stealing, it wasn't just going into their pockets. Some of it was being used to buy influence, bribes to judges, payments to politicians, but some of it was going somewhere else. She paused. "I found records of payments to a company called Western Security Associates, thousands of dollars every month for the past 3 years." "What kind of company?" "On paper, a private security firm. Guards for mining operations, protection for freight shipments, that sort of thing. But the amounts didn't match up. They were paying for something much bigger." "An army," Ethan said. Lydia nodded. "That's what I think. A private army, loyal only to the men who pay them. The kind of force you'd need if you were planning something more than just financial fraud." The implications settled over them like a cold fog. Financial crimes were one thing, terrible, yes, but ultimately about money. What Lydia was describing was something else entirely. Something that smelled like power, like control, like the kind of ambition that didn't stop at wealth. We're not just fighting corrupt businessmen, Ethan said. No, I don't think we are. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of it pressing down on them. Then Ethan stood and began gathering their supplies. San Francisco is still our best chance, he said. We find Marcus Webb, or whoever he really is, and we find out what happened to those documents. If he's betrayed you, we take them back. If he hasn't, we make him publish now, today, before anyone else dies. And if the documents are already gone, if they've been destroyed, then we find another way. He helped her to her feet, his hands gentle on her arms. You remember what was in those ledgers. You know the names, the amounts, the dates. We write it all down. We take it to every newspaper in the state. We shout it from the rooftops until someone listens. They'll say I'm lying. They'll say I made it up to cover my crimes. Maybe. But some people will believe you. Some people will investigate. And once the questions start, they won't stop. He squeezed her hands briefly, then released them. Truth has a way of surviving, Lydia, even when powerful men try to bury it. She looked at him, this quiet, stubborn man who had chosen to stand with her against impossible odds, and something in her expression softened. You really believe that, don't you? I have to. It's the only thing that makes any of this worth doing. They mounted their horses and rode on, following the sun toward the coast, toward San Francisco, toward whatever waited for them there. Behind them, the canyon fell silent again, keeping its secrets as it always had. The coast road was busier than the mountain trails, farmers heading to market, freight wagons carrying goods between towns, the occasional stagecoach rattling past in a cloud of dust. Ethan and Lydia kept their heads down, avoided eye contact, became just two more travelers among many. They stopped that night at a small inn outside of Vallejo, a weathered establishment that catered to working folk who couldn't afford the fancy hotels in town. Ethan paid for 2 rooms with coins that wouldn't be traced, and they ate dinner in the common room surrounded by strangers who paid them no attention. We should reach San Francisco tomorrow afternoon, Ethan said quietly, pushing food around his plate. Do you know where Marcus Webb works, the address of the newspaper? The Chronicle's offices are on Montgomery Street. I don't know the exact number, but it's a major publication. Shouldn't be hard to find. And if Webb isn't there, if he's gone into hiding, or if he's dead? Lydia's voice was flat. Then we find whoever he trusted with the documents, his editor, a colleague, someone. A group of men at the bar erupted in laughter, and both Ethan and Lydia tensed before realizing it had nothing to do with them. It was exhausting, this constant vigilance. Every stranger a potential threat, every sound a possible warning. Get some sleep, Ethan said. I'll keep watch tonight. We should take turns. I'll keep watch, he repeated. You need rest more than I do. Your ribs are still healing, and tomorrow is going to be hard. She wanted to argue. He could see it in the set of her jaw, but exhaustion won out. She nodded and rose from the table. Ethan, she said quietly, pausing beside his chair. Thank you. For everything. Don't thank me yet. We're a long way from finished. I know, but whatever happens... She touched his shoulder briefly, a gesture so small he might have imagined it. I'm glad I'm not facing this alone. Then she was gone, disappearing up the narrow stairs to her room, leaving Ethan alone with his cold dinner and his racing thoughts. He sat in the common room until the fire burned low, watching the door, watching the windows, watching for any sign that trouble had followed them here. None came. The night passed quietly, and when dawn broke over the distant hills, they were on the road again. San Francisco rose from the morning mist like a dream made solid, a sprawling city of wood and brick, climbing the hills above the bay, its streets alive with people and horses and the endless energy of commerce. Ships crowded the harbor, their masts forming a forest against the gray sky. The smell of the sea mixed with coal smoke and cooking food, and the 1,000 other scents of civilization. For Ethan, who had spent the last decade on an isolated ranch, it was overwhelming. Too many people, too much noise, too many places for danger to hide. For Lydia, it was something else entirely. This was the city that had destroyed her life. The city where powerful men had decided she needed to die. She rode through its streets with her head high and her jaw set, refusing to be intimidated by the place that had taken everything from her. They found the Chronicle's offices on Montgomery Street, a four-story building with large windows and the newspaper's name painted in gold letters above the entrance. Men in suits hurried in and out, their arms full of papers, their faces intent with the urgency of deadline. "Wait here," Ethan said, dismounting and tying his horse to a post. "Let me go in first, see what I can find out. They don't know your face. They might not know mine, but they definitely know yours. If Marcus Webb has betrayed you, if he's told his brother what you look like, walking through that door would be suicide." She didn't like it, but she couldn't argue with the logic. She stayed with the horses while Ethan climbed the steps and pushed through the heavy wooden door. The lobby was chaos. Reporters shouting across desks, typewriters clacking, the constant rustle of paper. Ethan approached a harried-looking clerk at the front desk. "I'm looking for Marcus Webb," he said. "I have information he'll want." The clerk barely glanced up. "Webb? He's not here. When do you expect him back?" "Don't expect him at all. He hasn't been in for 2 weeks. No one knows where he is." Ethan kept his expression neutral. 2 weeks? That's a long time for a reporter to be absent. "Tell me about it." The clerk finally looked up, irritation clear on his face. "We've got deadlines, and Webb's got half a dozen stories that need finishing. Editor's about to have his head." "Did he leave any word? Any message about where he was going?" "Mister, if I knew that, I'd have told the editor myself and gotten the reward. All I know is he came in one morning 2 weeks ago, looked like he'd seen a ghost, grabbed some papers from his desk, and left without saying a word to anyone. Haven't seen him since." 2 weeks ago, right around the time Lydia had been beaten and left for dead on a California road. "Is there anyone else I could speak to? Someone who worked closely with him?" The clerk sighed, clearly wanting this conversation to end. "Try the press room. Ask for Samuel Green. He and Webb were thick as thieves." Ethan thanked him and made his way through the maze of desks toward the back of the building. The press room was louder than the lobby, massive printing presses thundering away, men shouting over the noise, the air thick with the smell of ink. He found a bearded man with ink-stained fingers supervising the feeding of paper into one of the machines. "Samuel Green?" Ethan had to shout to be heard. The man looked up, suspicious. "Who's asking? My name's not important. I need to find Marcus Webb. It's urgent." Green's expression changed. Something flickered behind his eyes, a combination of fear and calculation. He held up a hand to one of his workers, then gestured for Ethan to follow him through a side door into a narrow alley behind the building. The sudden quiet was almost disorienting. Green pulled the door shut and turned to face him, arms crossed. "You're the second person this week asking about Marcus," he said. "The first one had the look of a man who hurts people for money. You don't have that look, but that doesn't mean I trust you." "I understand, but I need to find him. A woman's life depends on it." "Lydia Moore." It wasn't a question. Ethan's hand moved instinctively toward his pistol. Green noticed but didn't flinch. "Easy, friend. I'm not your enemy. Marcus told me about her, about what she gave him, what she was running from. He also told me what would happen if the wrong people found out he was sitting on that story." "Then you know who's looking for her. You know what they're capable of." "I know Harrison Webb is Marcus's brother. I know Marcus has spent his whole life trying to escape that shadow. And I know that 2 weeks ago, Harrison paid Marcus a visit that scared him half to death." "What did he say? What did Harrison want?" Green glanced both ways down the alley, making sure they were alone. "He wanted the documents. The evidence Lydia Moore had given Marcus. Said if Marcus didn't hand them over, he'd destroy him, his career, his reputation, everything. Said he'd make sure Marcus was implicated in the fraud himself, that he'd spend the rest of his life in prison." "And Marcus gave them to him?" "No." Green's voice dropped. "That's why Harrison's men have been tearing the city apart looking for him. Marcus ran, took the documents with him. Last thing he said to me was that he knew somewhere safe, somewhere they'd never think to look. Then he was gone." Hope flickered in Ethan's chest, small, fragile, but real. "Do you know where he went?" "If I knew, I'd have gone myself. Marcus is a good man, better than his brother ever deserved. But he was terrified. Said Harrison had people everywhere, that anyone who helped him would be a target." Green paused. "Including you, if you're smart enough to realize what you're walking into." "I realized that a week ago. It didn't stop me then, and it won't stop me now. Green studied him for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. There's a place Marcus used to go when he needed to think. A boarding house in Chinatown, run by an old woman named Mrs. Chen. Marcus helped her once, years ago, got her story into the paper when some men were trying to steal her property. She's been loyal to him ever since. You think he's there? I think if he's anywhere, that's where I'd start looking. Green fished a scrap of paper from his pocket and scribbled an address. Careful how you approach. The neighborhood watches out for her, and they don't take kindly to strangers asking questions. Ethan took the paper. Thank you. I know you're taking a risk telling me this. Just find him. Find him and help him finish what he started. Green's jaw tightened. These men, the ones you're fighting, they've been running this city for too long, buying judges, bribing politicians, crushing anyone who gets in their way. Marcus was the first one brave enough to try to stop them. Don't let that courage die. He opened the door to return to the press room, then paused. One more thing. Harrison Webb has a man working for him, a hired killer named Silas Black. Former Army, discharged for brutality. If Black finds you before you find Marcus, you won't get a second chance. The door closed, and Ethan was alone in the alley with the smell of garbage and the distant rumble of the presses. He looked at the address in his hand, memorized it, then burned the paper with a match. When he returned to Lydia, her face was tight with anxiety. Well, she demanded, did you find him? He's not at the newspaper. Hasn't been for 2 weeks. Not since his brother paid him a visit. Her face went pale. Harrison knows. He knows Marcus has the documents. He knows, but he doesn't have them. Marcus ran, took everything with him. Ethan mounted his horse and offered her his hand. I know where he might be hiding. We need to move. Chinatown was another world. Lanterns hung across narrow streets, casting red and gold light over signs written in characters Ethan couldn't read. The smell of cooking, strange spices, roasting meat, something sweet and unfamiliar filled the air. People crowded the sidewalks, moving with purpose, speaking in rapid Cantonese that rose and fell like music. Ethan and Lydia tied their horses at a stable on the edge of the district and continued on foot. They drew stares, 2 white faces in a sea of Chinese, but no one stopped them. Ethan kept his hand near his pistol, more from habit than expectation. Whatever danger waited here, it wasn't in these crowds. The boarding house was a narrow building tucked between a tea shop and an herbalist, its wooden facade weathered but clean. The door was painted red, and a string of paper charms hung from the lintel, rustling in the breeze. Ethan knocked. For a long moment nothing happened. Then the door opened a crack, and an ancient face peered out. Mrs. Chen, tiny and wizened, with eyes that missed nothing. Yes? We're looking for Marcus Webb, Ethan said. Samuel Green sent us. The old woman studied him, then Lydia, then the street behind them. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because the door opened wider. Come, quickly! The interior was dim and smelled of incense. Mrs. Chen led them through a narrow hallway, past doors that remained firmly closed, up a flight of stairs that creaked under their weight. At the top, she stopped before a door and knocked in a specific pattern. 2 short, 3 long, 2 short. The door opened and Marcus Webb stood before them. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His brown hair was disheveled, his glasses smudged, his face shadowed with stubble. But his eyes were sharp and alert, and when he saw Lydia, relief washed over his features like a wave. Miss Moore, he breathed. You're alive. I heard. They said they'd found you, that you were... She's alive, Ethan said. No thanks to the men your brother sent after her. Marcus flinched as if struck. I didn't know Harrison would... Let's talk inside, Lydia said, before someone notices we're here. The room was small but clean, dominated by a desk covered in papers and a narrow bed that looked like it hadn't been slept in. Marcus cleared chairs for them, his movements nervous and jerky. I've been trying to figure out what to do, he said, the words tumbling out. After Harrison came to see me, after he made his threats, I panicked. I knew if I stayed at the Chronicle, if I let him find me, everything would be lost. The documents, the story, all of it. So you ran, Lydia said. There was no accusation in her voice, just exhaustion. I ran, but I took everything with me. He gestured at the papers on the desk. It's all here. Every ledger, every letter, every piece of proof. I've been going through it, organizing it, building a case that even Harrison's lawyers can't dismiss. Ethan moved to the desk, scanning the documents. Names jumped out at him. Names he recognized from newspapers, from politics, from the upper echelons of California society. You weren't exaggerating. This would bring down half the state government. More than half. Senator Morrison, Judge Patterson, the mayor of Sacramento, the chief of police in San Francisco, they're all in Harrison's pocket. They've been running the state like a criminal enterprise for years, and no one's had the evidence to stop them. Marcus's voice hardened. Until now. Then why haven't you published? Lydia asked. Why are you hiding here instead of taking this to your editor? Marcus's face crumpled. Because of what Harrison said. He told me if I published, if a single word of this story appeared in print, he would make sure you were captured and hanged for the murders you didn't commit. He said your blood would be on my hands. The room went silent. Ethan watched Lydia's face as the implications sank in. Marcus had been protecting her, had sacrificed his career, his safety, his entire life to keep her alive. I couldn't do it, Marcus whispered. I couldn't let you die because of a story, even if that story was true, even if it needed to be told. Lydia rose and crossed to where Marcus sat. Slowly, gently, she took his hands in hers. Thank you, she said. Thank you for caring. But you were wrong. He looked up, confusion written across his features. My life isn't worth more than the truth. My life isn't worth more than all the lives these men will destroy if they're allowed to continue. If I have to die to expose them, then that's a price I'm willing to pay. But I'm already a dead woman walking. They've already tried to kill me once. They'll try again, whether you publish or not. The only question is whether my death means something. She squeezed his hands. You have the power to make it mean something. Don't take that away from me. Marcus stared at her, tears welling in his eyes. Then he nodded slowly. What do we do? He asked. How do we publish without giving Harrison time to silence us? Ethan had been thinking about that. The Chronicle is compromised. Too many people know Marcus is connected to the story. We need another paper, one that Harrison doesn't control. The Examiner, Marcus said. They hate Harrison almost as much as I do, and their editor, William Collins, has been looking for a story that would make his reputation. Can he be trusted? As much as any journalist can be trusted with the scoop of the decade, he won't betray us, not when publishing means fame and fortune. Then we take him the evidence. Tonight, if possible. Marcus hesitated. There's a complication. Collins won't publish based on documents alone. He'll want corroboration, a witness who can testify to what Pacific Union Holdings was doing, someone who saw the fraud firsthand. All eyes turned to Lydia. I was a bookkeeper, she said. I can explain every number in those ledgers. I can point to specific transactions, specific meetings, specific conversations I overheard. If Collins needs a witness, I'll be his witness. You'll be painting a target on your back, Ethan said quietly. The target is already there. This just gives me a chance to shoot back. They made their plans quickly, aware that every passing hour increased the risk of discovery. Marcus would contact William Collins through a trusted intermediary and arrange a meeting for that night. Lydia would prepare her testimony, organizing her memories into a coherent narrative. Ethan would keep watch, ready to move them at the first sign of trouble. Mrs. Chen brought them tea and rice, refusing payment with a wave of her hand. Any enemy of the men who tried to take my home is a friend of mine, she said in accented English. You stay as long as you need. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan found himself watching Lydia as she worked. She had transformed in the past hour, the fear and exhaustion fading, replaced by fierce determination. This was her element, he realized. Facts and figures, ledgers and logic. She might have been beaten and hunted and nearly killed, but when it came to the evidence that could bring down an empire, she was in command. You're staring, she said without looking up. Sorry, just thinking. About what? About how different you look when you're fighting instead of running. She paused, pen hovering over paper. Is that a good thing? It's the best thing I've seen in a long time. She met his eyes then, and something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. They were in this together now, bound by circumstance and choice, and whatever happened next, they would face it side by side. "When this is over," she said quietly, "when we've published the story and the men who killed my brother are behind bars, what then?" "I haven't thought that far ahead." "Liar." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "You've been thinking about it since you picked me up off that road." Ethan couldn't deny it. He had been thinking about it, about the ranch waiting in the hills, about the life he had built there, about how empty that life had felt until a broken woman had stumbled into it. "I think," he said carefully, "that when this is over, I'd like to show you my ranch, if you're interested." "Is that an invitation?" "It's whatever you want it to be." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she returned to her work, but the smile remained. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like that very much." The message came as the sun was setting. Collins had agreed to meet at a private room in a restaurant near the waterfront. 1 hour. Come alone. "Not alone," Ethan said immediately. "That's not happening." "Collins is cautious," Marcus argued. "If he sees strangers, he might think it's a trap." "And if it is a trap? If Harrison's people have gotten to him already?" "Then we walk into it together." Lydia was already gathering the documents, organizing them into a leather satchel. "I'm not hiding anymore. I'm not letting other people take risks while I cower in a safe room. This is my fight, and I'm going to fight it." Ethan wanted to argue, but he recognized the look on her face. She had made her decision, and nothing he said would change it. "Fine, but I'm coming with you. I'll wait outside, watch the exits. If anything goes wrong, you get out and you find me. And if I can't, then I come in after you." The restaurant was a respectable establishment, catering to the business class that worked the docks and warehouses. Lydia entered through the front door with Marcus, while Ethan took up position across the street, where he could see both entrances and the windows of the private rooms above. Minutes passed. The sun sank below the horizon. The street grew darker, gas lamps flickering to life along the sidewalk. Ethan watched and waited, his hand resting on his pistol, every nerve humming with tension. Then he saw them. 3 men, moving with purpose, approaching the restaurant from different directions. They weren't dressed like businessmen. Their clothes were plain, practical, chosen for ease of movement, and they were armed. He could see the bulges beneath their coats. Harrison's men. It had to be. Ethan moved, crossing the street at an angle that would intercept the lead man before he reached the restaurant door. But he was too slow. The man was already inside, disappearing through the entrance with his companions close behind. Inside, Lydia was presenting her testimony to William Collins when the door burst open. The 3 men entered with guns drawn, fanning out to cover the room. Behind them came a 4th figure, Harrison Webb himself, his silver hair immaculate, his smile cold and triumphant. "Miss Moore," he said pleasantly, "how delightful to see you again. And Marcus, dear brother, you've caused me such trouble. I was beginning to think you'd actually grown a spine." Collins was on his feet, sputtering with outrage. "What is the meaning of this? This is a private meeting." "Sit down, Mr. Collins. This doesn't concern you." Harrison's eyes never left Lydia. "I must admit, I'm impressed. You've survived longer than I expected. But all stories must end, and this one ends tonight." "You can't kill us here," Marcus said, his voice shaking but defiant. "There are witnesses. The restaurant is full of people." "Kill you? My dear brother, I'm not here to kill anyone. I'm here to resolve a family matter." Harrison gestured to one of his men, who produced a document. "This is a confession, written in your hand, Marcus, admitting that you fabricated the evidence against Pacific Union Holdings as part of a scheme to extort money from your own brother. Miss Moore is named as your accomplice. The documents you've gathered are forgeries created to support your criminal enterprise." "No one will believe that," Lydia said. "Won't they? A wanted murderer and a disgraced journalist working together to destroy respected businessmen? The story writes itself." Harrison's smile widened. "Sign the confession, and I'll let you live. Refuse, and, well, accidents happen in this city, especially to people who make themselves inconvenient." The silence stretched between them, heavy with threat. Lydia looked at Marcus, saw the fear in his eyes, and felt her own resolve harden. No, she said. Harrison's smile faltered. I beg your pardon? I said no. I won't sign your confession. I won't help you bury the truth. You can threaten me all you want, but I've already survived your hired thugs once. I'm not afraid of you. You should be. Maybe. But fear doesn't change what's right. She stood, facing him directly. You killed my brother. You killed his wife. You've stolen millions from innocent people and corrupted everything you've touched. And sooner or later, you're going to answer for it. Harrison's face went cold. Silas. The largest of his men stepped forward. Silas Black, the killer Green had warned about. His hand closed around Lydia's arm with crushing force. Take her somewhere quiet, Harrison said. Help her understand the consequences of her decisions. That was when the window shattered. Ethan came through in a shower of glass, his pistol already firing. The first shot took Silas in the shoulder, spinning him away from Lydia. The second caught one of the other men in the leg. The room erupted into chaos, screaming, gunfire, furniture crashing. Harrison dove for cover behind an overturned table. Marcus grabbed the satchel of documents and pulled Collins toward a back door. Lydia scrambled for the window, for Ethan, for escape. Go! Ethan shouted, putting himself between her and the remaining gunmen. Get out of here! I'll hold them! She wanted to argue, wanted to stay and fight beside him, but she knew he was right. The evidence was what mattered. If it was lost, everything they'd fought for was lost with it. She ran. Behind her she heard more gunfire, heard Ethan's voice shouting commands, heard the crash of bodies hitting the floor. Then she was through the back door, out into the alley, Marcus and Collins close behind her. They ran through the darkening streets, pursued by shouts and footsteps, until they finally lost themselves in the maze of Chinatown's alleys. Only then did Lydia allow herself to stop, to lean against a wall and catch her breath. Where's Ethan? Marcus gasped. Is he? I don't know. The words tore at her throat. I don't know if he's alive or dead. But even as she said it, even as terror threatened to overwhelm her, she forced herself to think. Ethan had given her a chance. He had risked his life to get her out of that room. She couldn't waste his sacrifice by falling apart. Collins, she said, turning to the journalist, can you still publish the story? He stared at her, his face pale with shock. Publish? After what just happened? Especially after what just happened. Harrison Webb just attacked a journalist and tried to silence witnesses. That's not the action of an innocent man. She gripped his arm. You wanted a story that would make your reputation. This is it. Corruption, murder, conspiracy at the highest levels. But only if you're brave enough to print it. Collins looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Get me somewhere safe, he said. Somewhere I can write. Give me the documents and your testimony. I'll have it on the front page by morning. The night was far from over. Somewhere in the city, Ethan was fighting for his life. Somewhere Harrison Webb was regrouping, planning his next move. But as Lydia Moore followed Marcus Webb through the lamplit streets of San Francisco, the evidence that would bring down an empire clutched in her arms, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. The truth was going to come out. One way or another, the truth was going to win. And when it did, she would find Ethan Cole, and she would thank him properly. Or she would avenge him. Either way, Harrison Webb was going to pay for every drop of blood he had spilled. The hours that followed were the longest of Lydia's life. Mrs. Chen's boarding house became their fortress, its narrow halls and hidden rooms offering protection that the open streets could not. William Collins worked through the night at a small desk by candlelight, his pen scratching furiously across page after page as he transformed the evidence into prose that would shake California to its foundations. Marcus sat beside him, answering questions, clarifying details, providing context for the documents that Lydia had risked everything to preserve. But Lydia could not sit still. She paced the cramped room like a caged animal, her eyes returning again and again to the window that looked out over the sleeping city. Somewhere in that darkness, Ethan was either alive or dead, either fighting his way back to her or lying broken in some alley while Harrison Webb's men searched for the evidence that had slipped through their fingers. She had left him behind. The thought burned in her chest like a coal that refused to die. He had told her to run, had put himself between her and the guns, and she had obeyed. She had saved the evidence, saved the story, saved everything except the man who had saved her. "You did the right thing," Marcus said quietly, watching her from across the room. Ethan knew what he was doing. He made a choice. That doesn't make it easier. No, it doesn't. He rose and crossed to stand beside her at the window. But if you had stayed, if you had been captured or killed, his sacrifice would have meant nothing. The story would have died with you. And if he's dead, what then? Then we make sure his death wasn't in vain. We publish. We expose every dirty secret Harrison has been hiding. We bring down the men who killed your brother and tried to kill you. Marcus's voice hardened. We make them pay. Lydia turned to look at him, this quiet journalist who had given up everything to protect her. He was so different from his brother, she thought. Where Harrison was cold and calculating, Marcus was passionate and principled. Where Harrison used words as weapons, Marcus used them as tools for truth. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you do all this? You could have handed over the documents, made peace with your brother, gone back to your comfortable life. Instead, you chose to fight. Why?" Marcus was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was distant, touched with old pain. "When I was 12 years old, I watched my brother cheat a man out of his life savings, a farmer who had trusted Harrison with his money, who had believed the promises of wealth and security. Harrison took everything, and when the man came to demand answers, Harrison had him beaten and thrown in jail on false charges." Marcus's jaw tightened. That man hanged himself in his cell 3 days later, left behind a wife and 3 children who had nothing. "I'm sorry. I've been sorry for 30 years. Sorry and silent and complicit in my brother's crimes because I was too afraid to speak up." He turned to face her, and there was fire in his eyes. "Not anymore. When you came to me with that evidence, I saw a chance to finally make things right, to be the man I should have been all along. Even if it costs you everything? Especially then. Some debts can only be paid in full." The first gray light of dawn was creeping over the rooftops when the door burst open and Ethan Cole staggered through. Lydia cried out and rushed to him, catching him as his legs buckled. His face was bloodied, his left arm hanging at an angle that spoke of dislocation, or worse, his clothes torn and stained with what she desperately hoped was not all his own blood. But he was alive. He was breathing. He was here. "Ethan," she breathed, lowering him to a chair. "What happened? How did you get away?" "Killed 2 of them." His voice was hoarse, cracked. "Third one ran when he saw his friends go down. Harrison escaped through a back door before I could get to him. He tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. Should have seen the look on his face when I came through that window. Wasn't expecting that." "Your arm." "Dislocated. One of them got a good hit in before I put him down." He looked up at her, and despite the pain, his eyes were clear. "Did you get the evidence to Collins? Is the story safe?" "It's safe. He's writing it now." "Good. Good." Ethan's head fell back against the chair. "Then it was worth it." Mrs. Chen appeared with hot water and clean bandages, her ancient hand surprisingly strong as she helped Lydia tend to Ethan's wounds. The shoulder was the worst of it, but there were cuts that needed cleaning and bruises that would darken over the coming days. Through it all, Ethan bore the pain in silence, his teeth clenched, his eyes fixed on Lydia's face as if she were the only thing keeping him anchored to consciousness. "You shouldn't have come back," she said quietly, wrapping a bandage around his ribs. "You could have gotten away clean. Disappeared into the hills where they'd never find you. And leave you to face them alone?" He caught her hand, held it against his chest. "I told you we'd face this together. I meant it. You almost died. Almost doesn't count." His fingers tightened around hers. "I've been almost dead more times than I can count. War teaches you to stop being afraid of almost. It's the real thing that matters, and I'm not there yet." "Ethan." "Lydia." His voice softened, and something in his expression changed. "When I was fighting my way out of that restaurant, when I didn't know if I'd ever see you again, I realized something. I've spent 10 years building a life that was safe and quiet and completely empty, a life where nothing mattered enough to fight for. Then you came along, and suddenly I had something worth risking everything for." She stared at him, her heart pounding against her ribs. "What are you saying?" I'm saying that when this is over, when Harrison Webb is behind bars and your name is cleared, I want you to come home with me. Not as a guest. Not as someone I'm protecting. He lifted her hand to his lips. As someone I love. The word hung in the air between them, fragile and fierce and utterly unexpected. Lydia felt tears prick at her eyes, felt her throat close around emotions she had been too afraid to name. You barely know me, she whispered. I know enough. I know you're brave and stubborn and smarter than anyone I've ever met. I know you'd rather die than compromise what you believe in. I know that every minute I spend with you makes me want 1,000 more. His eyes searched hers. Is that enough? She should have said no. Should have reminded him that they were fugitives, that powerful men wanted them dead, that there was no guarantee they would survive the next 24 hours. But looking into his eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand around hers, she found she couldn't lie to him, couldn't lie to herself. Yes, she said softly. That's enough. She leaned down and kissed him then, gently, mindful of his split lip and battered face. It was a promise and a prayer and a declaration all at once. When she pulled back, he was smiling, and the pain in his eyes had been replaced by something warmer. Now, he said, let's finish what we started. Collins completed the article as the sun rose over San Francisco Bay. It was masterful work, 20 pages of damning prose that laid bare every crime Harrison Webb and his associates had committed. The fraud, the bribery, the murders of Thomas and Margaret Moore, the attempted murder of Lydia, and the conspiracy to frame her for crimes she hadn't committed. Every name, every date, every dollar was documented with evidence that could not be denied. This will destroy them, Collins said, reading through the final draft. When this hits the streets, Harrison Webb won't be able to show his face in public. Neither will Senator Morrison or Judge Patterson or any of the others. Will your editor print it? Marcus asked. My editor will print anything that sells papers, and this will sell more papers than any story in California history. Collins gathered the pages, his movements careful and reverent. I need to get this to the Examiner. The morning edition goes to press in 2 hours. If we move fast, we can have it on every newsstand by noon. They'll try to stop you, Lydia said. Harrison knows we went to you. His men will be watching the newspaper. Then we'll have to be clever. Collins thought for a moment. There's a side entrance, a delivery door that leads directly to the press room. If I can get in there without being seen, I can hand this directly to the typesetters. By the time Harrison realizes what's happening, it'll be too late to stop. I'll go with you, Ethan said, pushing himself to his feet despite Lydia's protests. Watch your back. You can barely stand. I can stand well enough to shoot. He retrieved his pistol from where it had fallen, checked the cylinder, and holstered it at his hip. Besides, I didn't come this far to watch from the sidelines while you finished the job. They argued, but in the end, they all went together. Mrs. Chen provided a back exit that led through a maze of alleys to the edge of Chinatown. From there, they made their way through the waking city, keeping to side streets and avoiding the main thoroughfares where Harrison's men might be watching. The Examiner's offices loomed before them, a solid brick building that seemed to pulse with energy even at this early hour. The delivery door was exactly where Collins had said it would be, tucked behind a stack of empty crates and guarded by a bored-looking man who straightened when he saw them approaching. Mr. Collins, the guard said, surprised. Didn't expect to see you using the back way. Special circumstances, Tom. I need to get inside without anyone knowing I'm here. Can you help with that? The guard glanced at the others, clearly curious but too professional to ask questions. Sure thing, Mr. Collins. Follow me. They slipped inside, moving through corridors that smelled of ink and machine oil. The press room was a cathedral of iron and steam, massive printing presses standing silent in the early morning light, waiting for the day's work to begin. Collins led them to a cramped office in the back where a heavy-set man with ink-stained fingers was reviewing layout sheets. George, Collins said, I need you to stop the presses. The man looked up, annoyed. Stop the... Do you have any idea what that costs? I have a story. The biggest story this paper has ever run. But it needs to go out today, this morning, before anyone can stop it. George's eyes narrowed. What kind of story? Collins handed over the pages. Read the first paragraph, then tell me if it's worth stopping the presses. The room went silent as George read. His expression shifted from skepticism to disbelief to something that looked almost like awe. "This is real?" he breathed. "You can prove all of this?" "Every word. I have documents, testimony, everything you need to back it up." Collins leaned forward. "But we have to move now. The men this story exposes will do anything to keep it from being published. They've already tried to kill the witnesses. If we wait, if we give them time to regroup, we might lose our chance forever." George stared at the pages for another long moment. Then he stood, decision made. "Henderson!" he bellowed. "Carter! Get in here! We're redesigning the front page!" What followed was controlled chaos. Typesetters rushed to compose the article while layout designers scrambled to make space on the front page. Collins hovered over every detail, checking and rechecking each paragraph, ensuring that nothing was lost or altered in the translation from manuscript to print. Lydia watched it all with a kind of dazed wonder. After weeks of running, of hiding, of fighting for her life, it was almost impossible to believe that it was finally happening. The truth was going to come out. The men who had destroyed her world were going to face justice. Her brother's death was going to mean something after all. Ethan stood beside her, his good arm around her shoulders. "How do you feel?" "Terrified," she admitted, "and relieved, and angry, and about 100 other things I can't even name." "That's about right." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Whatever happens next, you should know. I'm proud of you. What you've done, what you've survived, the courage you've shown, you're the bravest person I've ever met." "I couldn't have done it without you. You would have found a way. You're too stubborn to quit." She laughed, surprising herself. It felt strange, laughing after everything that had happened, but it also felt right, like the first crack in a dam that had been holding back too much for too long. "They're almost ready," Marcus said, joining them. "George says the first run will be off the press in 30 minutes. After that, there's no going back." "Good." Lydia straightened, squaring her shoulders. "I want to see it. I want to watch the first copy come off the line." They gathered in the press room as the great machines roared to life. The sound was deafening, a thunderous rhythm that shook the floor and filled the air with the smell of fresh ink. Huge rolls of paper fed through spinning cylinders, emerging on the other side, printed and folded and ready to change the world. George himself pulled the first copy from the line and handed it to Lydia with something like reverence. The headline screamed across the front page in letters 2 inches tall: "Corruption exposed. Senator, judge, and business leaders implicated in massive fraud scheme." Below it, in smaller but no less damning type, "Witness tells all. Murder, bribery, and conspiracy at the highest levels." Lydia stared at it, her hands trembling. There it was. Everything she had fought for, everything she had sacrificed, reduced to black ink on cheap paper. But it was more than paper. It was justice. It was vindication. It was proof that truth could survive even when powerful men tried to bury it. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's going to be a bloodbath," George said, but there was satisfaction in his voice. "Every paper in the state is going to be scrambling to follow up. The governor's office is going to be in chaos. The entire political establishment is going to come crashing down." "Good," Ethan said. "They've had it coming for a long time." The bundles of newspapers were loaded onto delivery wagons, ready to be distributed across the city. Collins watched them go with the expression of a man who has just lit a very large fuse and is waiting for the explosion. "It's done," he said. "Whatever happens now, the story is out. They can't stop it. They can't silence it. The truth is free." "And Harrison Webb?" Lydia asked. "What happens to him?" "That depends on how quickly the authorities act. With evidence this damning, they'll have no choice but to investigate. Arrest warrants will follow. Trials, convictions." Collins smiled grimly. "Your brother's killers will face justice, Miss Moore. I promise you that." It should have felt like victory. It should have felt like the end of a nightmare and the beginning of something new. But as Lydia stood in the heart of the Examiner's press room, surrounded by the thunder of the presses and the smell of fresh ink, she couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't over yet. She was right. The first shots came from the loading dock. A delivery wagon exploded in flames as men with rifles emerged from the shadows, firing at anything that moved. Workers screamed and scattered, diving behind machinery, scrambling for exits. More gunfire erupted from the front of the building, Harrison's men, attacking from multiple directions at once. "They found us!" Marcus shouted over the chaos. "How did they find us?" It didn't matter how. What mattered was survival. Ethan drew his pistol and pushed Lydia behind a massive printing press. "Stay here. Don't move until I come for you." "Ethan, no! I'll be back, I promise." He kissed her hard and fast, then disappeared into the smoke and chaos. The next few minutes were a blur of noise and terror. Lydia crouched behind the press, listening to gunfire echo through the cavernous space, watching shadows move through the smoke like demons from some industrial hell. She heard men shouting, heard screams of pain, heard the terrible crash of machinery being destroyed by stray bullets. Then a hand closed around her arm, and she was dragged out of hiding. Silas Black stood before her, his shoulder bandaged where Ethan had shot him the night before, his face twisted with pain and rage. Blood seeped through the white gauze, and his grip on her arm was iron. "Found you," he growled. "Mr. Webb wants a word." She fought him, kicking and scratching and biting, but he was too strong. He hauled her through the smoke toward a side door, ignoring her struggles like a man swatting at flies. Then Ethan appeared. He came out of the smoke like an avenging angel, his face streaked with soot and blood, his pistol empty but his fists ready. He hit Silas from behind, knocking the big man off balance, and Lydia tore free of his grip. "Run!" Ethan shouted. "Get out of here! Not without you!" Silas recovered fast, faster than a man his size should have been able to move. He drew a knife from his belt and lunged at Ethan, the blade slicing through the air in a vicious arc. Ethan dodged, but not completely. The knife caught his arm, opening a gash from elbow to wrist. They circled each other in the flickering light of the fires, two wounded men locked in a fight that could only end one way. Silas was bigger, stronger, and fighting with the desperation of a man who knew his entire world was collapsing. But Ethan was faster, smarter, and fighting for something more important than money or power. He was fighting for love. The knife flashed again. Ethan caught Silas's wrist, twisted, and felt bone crack under his fingers. Silas howled and dropped the blade. Ethan didn't hesitate. He drove his fist into the bigger man's throat, then his temple, then his nose. Silas staggered, blood pouring from his face, and Ethan hit him again and again and again until the killer finally collapsed and lay still. "Is he dead?" Lydia asked, her voice shaking. "Probably not." Ethan was breathing hard, his wounded arm hanging at his side. "Doesn't matter. He's not getting up anytime soon." More gunfire erupted from somewhere deeper in the building. They could hear Collins shouting orders, hear the crash of more machinery being destroyed. The Examiner was under siege, and it was only a matter of time before Harrison's men fought their way through to the presses. "We have to go," Ethan said. "Now." The newspapers are already on their way across the city. Harrison can destroy this building, but he can't destroy every copy. The story is out. He's lost. She knew he was right. But leaving felt like abandoning the people who had helped them, the workers who were fighting and dying to protect the truth they had risked so much to publish. "Collins," she said. "Marcus, we can't just leave them." "I'll find them. You get out." He gripped her shoulders, his eyes fierce. "I mean it, Lydia. You've done everything you needed to do. The rest is up to the law, the press, the people of California. Your part is finished." "My part isn't finished until you're safe." "Then I'll be safe. I promise." He kissed her forehead, gentle despite the chaos around them. "Wait for me by the delivery entrance. If I'm not there in 10 minutes, find Mrs. Chen. Tell her what happened. She'll know what to do." "Ethan?" 10 minutes. He turned and ran back into the smoke, toward the sound of gunfire and shouting voices. Lydia stood frozen for a moment, torn between following him and doing what he had asked. Then she made herself move, forcing her legs to carry her toward the delivery entrance, away from the battle, away from the man she loved. The fresh air hit her like a blessing when she emerged from the building. The morning sun was bright, the sky clear and blue, and she could hear the distant sounds of the city waking up to what would be the most explosive news in a generation. Somewhere out there, delivery wagons were carrying newspapers to every corner of San Francisco. Somewhere out there, people were reading about the crimes of Harrison Webb and his associates. Somewhere out there, justice was finally being done. She waited by the entrance, counting the seconds, watching the smoke pour from the building's broken windows. 8 minutes. 9. 10. Ethan didn't appear. She was about to go back inside to find him or die trying when a group of figures emerged from the smoke. Collins was there, supported by 2 workers, his face bloody but his eyes bright. Marcus was with him, clutching a sheaf of papers to his chest like they were more precious than gold. And behind them, limping badly but very much alive, came Ethan. Lydia ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck, not caring about the blood or the smoke or the chaos. He was alive. He was here. Nothing else mattered. "I told you I'd be back," he murmured into her hair. "You took too long." Got delayed. Had to convince a few of Harrison's men to reconsider their career choices. She laughed, or maybe she sobbed. She couldn't tell the difference anymore. All she knew was that she was holding him, and he was holding her, and somewhere behind them the building that had published the truth was burning, but the truth itself was unstoppable. "It's over," Marcus said, joining them. "Harrison's men are retreating. Someone must have called the police. They'll be here any minute." "And Harrison himself?" "Gone. Escaped during the fighting." Marcus's face was grim. "But it doesn't matter. With this story on every front page, he has nowhere to hide. Every law enforcement agency in the state will be looking for him." "The evidence? Safe." Collins held up the papers he was carrying, copies of the documents, backup proof in case the originals were destroyed. "We've got enough here to put them all away for the rest of their lives." Lydia closed her eyes, letting the relief wash over her. It was really over. After weeks of running, of hiding, of fighting for her life, it was finally, truly over. But even as she allowed herself to feel that relief, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning. Harrison Webb was still out there, still free. And men like Harrison didn't go down without a fight. The police arrived 10 minutes later, their wagons clattering up to the burning building with bells clanging and officers shouting orders. What they found was chaos, wounded men, destroyed machinery, and a story that was already spreading across the city like wildfire. Collins took charge, explaining the situation to the ranking officer with the authority of a man who had just published the scoop of his career. He produced evidence, named names, pointed to the wounded attackers who had failed to escape. By noon, arrest warrants had been issued for Senator Morrison, Judge Patterson, and a dozen other men whose crimes were now public knowledge. But Harrison Webb remained at large. The search spread across San Francisco, then across the state. Every police department, every sheriff's office, every federal marshal was given his description and ordered to bring him in. His accounts were frozen, his property seized, his allies abandoning him with the speed of rats fleeing a sinking ship. The empire he had built over decades was crumbling in hours, and still, no one could find him. Lydia spent the afternoon at the police station, giving her testimony to a parade of investigators who listened with growing horror as she described what she had witnessed and survived. She told them about the fraud she had uncovered, about the murders of her brother and sister-in-law, about the beating that had nearly killed her, about the conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of California politics. When she was finished, the lead investigator, a grizzled veteran named Captain Morrison, no relation to the senator, looked at her with something like awe. "Miss Moore," he said, "I've been doing this job for 30 years. I've seen corrupt politicians and crooked businessmen and every kind of criminal you can imagine. But I've never seen anything like this. The scope of it, the audacity." He shook his head. "You're a brave woman. What you've done, the risks you've taken, most people would have given up a long time ago." "I didn't have a choice," she said. "They killed my brother. They tried to kill me. Running wasn't going to save me. Fighting back was the only option I had." "Well, your fight is over now. The evidence you provided, combined with the newspaper story, is more than enough to convict everyone involved. The only piece we're missing is Harrison Webb himself. You'll find him. We will. Men like that, they can't hide forever. Sooner or later, someone will recognize him. Someone will turn him in. And when they do, he'll face justice like all the others." Lydia nodded, but the small voice in her mind refused to be silenced. Harrison Webb was not a man who accepted defeat. He would fight back. He would find a way. And until he was behind bars, none of them were truly safe. She found Ethan waiting for her outside the station, his wounds freshly bandaged, his arm in a sling. He looked exhausted, battered, and older than he had been a week ago. But when he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that made her heart ache. "How did it go?" he asked. "They're going to arrest everyone. Morrison, Patterson, all of them. It's really happening." "And Webb? Still missing?" She moved to stand beside him, leaning into his warmth. "They say it's only a matter of time before they find him." "Do you believe them?" "I want to." She looked up at him, and he could see the fear she was trying to hide. "But men like Harrison, they don't just disappear, they plan. They scheme, they find ways to survive." "Then we'll be ready for him." Ethan put his good arm around her shoulders. "Whatever he tries, we'll face it together, just like we've faced everything else." "I'm tired of facing things. I'm tired of fighting." "I know. But we're almost there. A few more days, maybe a week, and this will all be behind us. We'll go back to the ranch, leave the city and its chaos behind, start building something new." "Something like a life?" "Something exactly like a life." He pulled her closer. "A quiet life, a peaceful life. The kind of life where the biggest problem is whether the crops will come in on time or the cattle will sell at a good price." It sounded like paradise. After weeks of running and fighting and nearly dying, the thought of simple problems and quiet days was almost too beautiful to believe. "Promise me," she said softly. "Promise me we'll get there." "I promise." He lifted her chin, met her eyes. "We'll get there, Lydia, no matter what it takes. We'll get there together." The sun was setting over San Francisco, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in the city, newspapers were being read and reread, their explosive revelations spreading from person to person like fire through dry grass. Somewhere, powerful men were being hauled from their homes in handcuffs, their careers and reputations destroyed in a single afternoon. Somewhere, justice was being done. And somewhere, Harrison Webb was watching, waiting, planning his next move. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, Lydia allowed herself to rest in the arms of the man who had saved her life, who had chosen to stand with her against impossible odds, who had promised her a future worth fighting for. Tomorrow, they would face whatever came next. Tonight, they had earned this moment of peace. And as the last light faded from the sky and the stars emerged one by one over the battered city, Lydia Moore closed her eyes and let herself believe that everything was going to be all right. For the first time in months, she slept without nightmares. The days that followed the publication were a whirlwind of chaos and consequence. Lydia woke the next morning to find that the world had changed overnight. The Examiner's story had spread far beyond San Francisco, picked up by newspapers across the state and then across the nation. Telegraph wires hummed with the details of the scandal, and by the time the sun rose over the bay, Harrison Webb's name had become synonymous with corruption and betrayal. She and Ethan had taken refuge in a small hotel near the waterfront, a modest establishment where the proprietor asked no questions and accepted payment in cash. Mrs. Chen had insisted they leave Chinatown for their own safety, warning that Harrison's remaining men might come looking for revenge. The old woman had embraced Lydia before they left, her ancient eyes bright with something that looked like pride. "You did good thing," Mrs. Chen had said. "Truth always wins. Sometimes slow, but always wins." Now, sitting in the hotel room with a cup of weak coffee cooling in her hands, Lydia found herself hoping the old woman was right. The arrests had begun almost immediately after the story broke. Senator Morrison was taken into custody at his Sacramento mansion, dragged from his breakfast table in front of his horrified wife and children. Judge Patterson surrendered himself to federal marshals, his face a mask of cold fury as cameras captured his perp walk for the evening papers. One by one, the men named in the evidence were falling, their empires of influence crumbling like sandcastles before the tide. But Harrison Webb remained free. "They've searched every property he owns," Ethan said, reading from a newspaper spread across the small table. His arm was still in a sling, the wound from Silas Black's knife healing slowly but steadily. "His bank accounts have been frozen. His business partners are falling over themselves to cooperate with investigators. He has nowhere to go." Then why haven't they found him?" "Because men like Harrison don't rely on the obvious. He'll have money hidden somewhere. Resources no one knows about. He'll have planned for this, even if he never believed it would actually happen. Lydia set down her coffee, the bitter taste suddenly unbearable. So we just wait? We hide in this room while he plans his next move? We let the law do its job. Captain Morrison has men watching every train station, every port, every road out of the city. Harrison can't run forever. He doesn't need to run forever. He just needs to run long enough to find a way to strike back. She rose and crossed to the window, looking out at the bustling street below. I know men like him, Ethan. I worked for them. They don't accept defeat. They find ways to turn losses into victories, to make their enemies pay for the sin of winning. What are you saying? I'm saying that hiding isn't going to save us. As long as Harrison is free, we're in danger. The only way to truly end this is to find him before he finds us. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. Then he folded the newspaper and set it aside. You have an idea, he said. It wasn't a question. Maybe. Lydia turned to face him. When I worked at Pacific Union Holdings, there were rumors about Harrison, stories about a place he went when he needed to disappear, a cabin somewhere in the mountains, completely off the books. No deed, no paper trail, the perfect hiding spot. Rumors aren't exactly reliable. No, but I remember some of the details. The old-timers at the company used to joke about it, called it Harrison's Fortress, said it was somewhere near Lake Tahoe, accessible only by a single mountain trail. That's a lot of territory to search. I know, but I also remember something else. Harrison's secretary, a woman named Elizabeth Crane, she was the only person who knew the exact location. She handled all his personal arrangements, including travel to places that didn't officially exist. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Where is she now? That's the thing. Elizabeth quit Pacific Union Holdings about 6 months ago, suddenly with no explanation. At the time, I thought she'd just gotten a better offer somewhere, but now... Lydia's voice trailed off. Now I wonder if she learned something she shouldn't have, something that made her want to get as far away from Harrison Webb as possible. If she knew his secrets, she might know where he's hiding. Exactly. They found Elizabeth Crane's address through Marcus Webb, who had connections at the Chronicle's research department. She lived in a modest apartment building in the Mission District, a respectable neighborhood populated by working-class families and small business owners. It was the kind of place where a former secretary might settle if she wanted to disappear without actually disappearing, close enough to civilization to feel safe, anonymous enough to avoid notice. Lydia and Ethan approached the building in the late afternoon, when the streets were busy with people returning from work. They climbed 3 flights of stairs to a door marked 3B and knocked. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a voice came from the other side, sharp with suspicion. Who is it? My name is Lydia Moore. I used to work at Pacific Union Holdings. I need to speak with you about Harrison Webb. Silence. Then the sound of locks being undone, one after another. The door opened a crack, revealing a pale face framed by graying hair. Elizabeth Crane had aged since Lydia last saw her. Her eyes were shadowed, her skin drawn tight over prominent cheekbones. She looked like a woman who hadn't slept well in months. I know who you are, Elizabeth said. I've read the papers. They're saying you're a hero now. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who refused to be silenced. That makes you braver than most. Elizabeth's eyes darted past them, scanning the hallway. Come in, quickly. The apartment was small but neat, furnished with the careful precision of someone who valued order above all else. Elizabeth led them to a sitting area and gestured for them to take seats on a worn sofa. I wondered if someone would come, she said, settling into a chair across from them. After the story broke, after they started arresting everyone, I knew it was only a matter of time. You're not in any danger from us, Lydia said. We're not here to hurt you or turn you in. We just need information. About Harrison. Elizabeth's voice was flat, empty. About where he's hiding. Yes. The older woman laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You think I'd protect him after everything he did? She shook her head. I worked for that man for 15 years. 15 years of keeping his secrets, covering his tracks, pretending not to see the things he did. And do you know what I got for my loyalty? Threats. When I finally worked up the courage to leave, he made it very clear what would happen if I ever talked. But you're talking now. Because he can't hurt me anymore. not with the whole world watching. Elizabeth leaned forward, her eyes suddenly fierce. I want to see him burn, Miss Moore. I want to watch everything he built come crashing down around him. And if helping you is what it takes to make that happen, then I'll tell you whatever you want to know. The story Elizabeth told painted a portrait of a man far more dangerous than even Lydia had imagined. Harrison Webb had been planning for disaster for years, methodically building escape routes and hiding places that existed completely outside the legal system. He had multiple identities, each with its own set of documents and bank accounts. He had contacts in foreign countries who owed him favors and would shelter him without asking questions. And he had the cabin in the mountains, his final refuge, the place he would go when all other options had failed. It's about 60 miles northeast of Sacramento, Elizabeth said, sketching a rough map on a piece of paper. You take the main road toward Tahoe until you reach a town called Pine Hollow. From there, it's another 20 miles on a dirt trail that barely shows up on any maps. The cabin itself is hidden in a valley, surrounded by forest on all sides. You'd never find it unless you knew exactly where to look. And you knew where to look. I arranged his supplies for years. Food, ammunition, medical equipment, everything a man would need to survive alone for months. Elizabeth's voice hardened. He called it his insurance policy, said that if things ever went wrong, he'd disappear into those mountains and wait until the heat died down. Then he'd come back and make everyone who crossed him pay. Lydia exchanged a glance with Ethan. This was exactly what they had feared. Harrison wasn't running. He was regrouping, waiting for his moment to strike. We need to tell Captain Morrison, Ethan said. Get the authorities up there before Harrison has a chance to move. No. Lydia's voice was sharp, certain. By the time we convince the police, by the time they organize a search party and make their way up that mountain, Harrison could be gone. He has contacts, resources, ways of knowing when trouble is coming. If we want to catch him, we have to move now. Tonight. Just the two of us? Against a man who's probably armed to the teeth and desperate? We won't be alone. Lydia turned to Elizabeth. You said Harrison had ammunition in that cabin. Weapons? Enough to arm a small militia. He was always paranoid, always preparing for the worst. Then we'll need help. People we can trust, people who know how to fight. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then he nodded slowly. There's a man I served with during the war. His name's Daniel Hawkins. He lives about 20 miles outside Sacramento now, runs a small ranch with his wife. He's the best shot I've ever seen, and he owes me his life. Can you reach him? If we leave now, we can be at his place by midnight. If he agrees to help, we can be at the cabin by tomorrow afternoon. Lydia looked at Elizabeth, then at Ethan, then at the rough map sketched on paper. The plan was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was also their best chance to end this once and for all. Then let's go, she said. They rode through the night, following roads that grew narrower and rougher as they left San Francisco behind. The moon hung fat and bright above them, illuminating a landscape that shifted from coastal hills to towering forests to the jagged peaks of the Sierra Nevada. By the time they reached Daniel Hawkins's ranch, the first gray light of dawn was creeping over the mountains. Daniel was a big man, broad-shouldered and weathered by years of hard work, with a beard that had gone gray at the edges and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. He listened in silence as Ethan explained the situation, his expression unreadable. You want me to help you hunt down one of the richest men in California, he said when Ethan finished. A man who's probably sitting in a fortified cabin with enough weapons to fight off an army. I wouldn't ask if I had any other choice. I know you wouldn't. Daniel glanced at Lydia, assessing her with the practiced eye of a soldier. And her? She coming too? I wouldn't try to stop her. No, I don't suppose you would. Daniel was quiet for a moment, stroking his beard. Then he sighed and pushed himself to his feet. All right, let me get my rifle. And let me tell Mary I might not be home for supper. They set out an hour later, 3 riders moving steadily northward through country that grew wilder with every mile. The road to Pine Hollow was little more than a track, rutted and overgrown, clearly unused for months. Beyond the town, a ramshackle collection of buildings that looked like they had been abandoned decades ago, the trail became worse, forcing them to dismount and lead their horses through sections where the path had collapsed entirely. By late afternoon, they had reached the valley Elizabeth had described. The cabin sat at the base of a steep hillside, surrounded by pine trees so tall and thick that they blocked out most of the sky. It was larger than Lydia had expected. Not a rough frontier shelter, but a proper structure, with glass windows and a stone chimney and a porch that wrapped around three sides. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin gray column. "He's there," Daniel said quietly, studying the scene through a spyglass. "I can see movement inside. Looks like just one man, but that doesn't mean anything. Could have others hiding." "How do we approach?" Lydia asked. "Carefully." Ethan was checking his pistol, his movements quick and efficient despite his injured arm. "Daniel, you take position on that ridge to the north. You'll have a clear line of sight to the front door. If Harrison tries to run, you stop him. And you? Lydia and I will approach from the south, through the trees. We'll try to get close enough to see what we're dealing with before we make any moves." Daniel nodded and began making his way toward the ridge, moving with the quiet efficiency of a man who had spent years learning to be invisible. Ethan and Lydia watched him go, then turned to each other. "You don't have to do this," Ethan said quietly. "You could stay here, wait for us to flush him out." "No." Lydia's voice was firm. "This is my fight. Thomas's fight. I'm not hiding while other people take the risks." "I had to try." "I know." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of his stubble against her palm. "Whatever happens in there, I want you to know. These past weeks have been the most terrifying of my life, but they've also been the most meaningful, because of you." "Lydia, let me finish." Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I came to California to make a new life for myself. I never expected to find love. Never expected to find someone who would fight for me, stand beside me, believe in me when the whole world thought I was a murderer. But I found you, Ethan Cole. And whatever happens next, I want you to know that I love you, with everything I have." He pulled her close, holding her against his chest, feeling her heart beat against his own. "I love you too," he said quietly, "and nothing that happens in that cabin is going to change that. We're going to finish this together, and then we're going to build the life we talked about, the quiet life, the peaceful life. Promise?" "Promise." They kissed, brief but fierce, a seal on a covenant that went deeper than words. Then they separated and began making their way through the trees toward the cabin. The approach took 20 minutes, each step careful and measured. They moved from shadow to shadow, using the trees as cover, freezing whenever a branch snapped or a bird took flight. The cabin grew larger as they got closer, its windows dark despite the smoke rising from the chimney. They were 50 feet away when the front door opened and Harrison Webb stepped onto the porch. He looked different than Lydia remembered. The polished businessman was gone, replaced by something rawer and more dangerous. His silver hair was unkempt, his clothes wrinkled and stained, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were exactly the same, and they were looking directly at her. "Miss Moore," he called, his voice carrying clearly through the still mountain air. "I was wondering when you'd come. I must admit, I expected the police first, but this is so much better." Lydia froze behind her tree, her heart pounding. Beside her, Ethan raised his pistol, but Harrison made no move toward a weapon. "I know you're out there too, Mr. Cole, and whoever you brought with you, the man on the ridge with the rifle. I've been watching you approach for the past hour." Harrison smiled, a thin, predatory expression. "Did you really think I wouldn't prepare for this? That I'd leave myself vulnerable to a surprise attack?" "It's over, Harrison," Lydia called back, finding her voice. "The police know where you are. By tomorrow morning, this place will be surrounded. You can't escape." "Escape?" Harrison laughed. "My dear girl, I have no intention of escaping. I've accepted that my old life is finished. The empire I built, the power I accumulated, it's all gone. Your little newspaper story saw to that." "Then what do you want?" "Justice." The word dripped with irony. "Isn't that what you wanted? Isn't that why you risked everything, destroyed everything, in the name of justice?" "I wanted the truth. I wanted the men who killed my brother to face consequences. And they will. Morrison, Patterson, all of them. They'll spend the rest of their lives in prison. Their reputations destroyed, their families shattered. You've won, Miss Moore. Congratulations." Harrison's smile faded. "But you haven't won everything. Because while those men rot in cells, I intend to make sure you never enjoy your victory. He reached into his coat. Ethan fired before Harrison's hand emerged. The shot went wide, splintering the porch railing, and Harrison dove back through the doorway. A moment later, the cabin's windows shattered outward as gunfire erupted from inside. "Down!" Ethan shouted, dragging Lydia behind a fallen log as bullets tore through the air around them. The next few minutes were chaos. Harrison had clearly prepared for a siege. The gunfire was coming from multiple positions, suggesting he had rigged automatic weapons or had more men inside than they had realized. Daniel returned fire from the ridge, his rifle cracking in measured intervals, but the thick walls of the cabin provided ample cover. "We're pinned down," Ethan said, reloading his pistol. "He's got us outgunned. There has to be another way in, a back door, a window. He'll have those covered too." Lydia pressed herself against the log, her mind racing. Harrison had been planning this for years, preparing for exactly this scenario. He would have thought of everything, accounted for every possibility. There was no way to outfight him with the resources they had, unless they outthought him instead. "The chimney," she said suddenly. "He has a fire burning. That means the flue is open. You want to go down the chimney?" "No, I want to go up it." She grabbed Ethan's arm. "When I worked at Pacific Union, Harrison used to brag about the safety features in his buildings. Fire suppression systems, automatic alarms, the best money could buy. But that cabin is old, built before he owned it. If the chimney is original, if it's made of stone rather than metal..." Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes. "Fire. The whole valley is dry as bone. If we can get a fire started behind the cabin, if we can make him think the forest is burning, he'll have to run. He won't have any choice." "Exactly." They moved. Ethan provided covering fire while Lydia circled around to the back of the cabin, keeping low, using every rock and tree for cover. The ground was littered with dry pine needles and fallen branches, perfect kindling. She gathered what she could carry and piled it against a cluster of bushes that grew close to the cabin's rear wall. Her hands were shaking as she struck a match. The first one went out. The second one too. On the third try, the flame caught the dry needles and began to spread. Within minutes, the fire was roaring. Smoke billowed into the sky, thick and black, carried by the mountain wind toward the cabin. The dry brush ignited like paper, flames leaping from bush to bush, racing toward the structure with terrifying speed. Harrison appeared at the back window, his face contorted with fury. He saw Lydia through the smoke, saw what she had done, and raised his pistol. The shot from Daniel's rifle came first. Harrison staggered, his pistol flying from his hand as the bullet caught him in the shoulder. He stumbled back from the window, disappearing into the smoke that was now filling the cabin's interior. "He's hit!" Ethan shouted. "Move in!" They converged on the cabin from 3 directions. Ethan from the front, Daniel from the ridge, Lydia from the back. The fire was spreading rapidly now, consuming the dry wood of the porch, licking at the walls. Inside they could hear coughing, stumbling, the sounds of a man trying to navigate through smoke and chaos. Ethan reached the front door first. He kicked it open and plunged inside, his pistol raised, his eyes watering from the smoke. Harrison was on his knees in the main room, blood streaming from his shoulder, his face a mask of pain and rage. "It's over," Ethan said. "You're coming with us." "Over?" Harrison laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. "It's never over. Even if you kill me, even if you burn this whole mountain to the ground, there will be others. Men who owe me favors, men who share my vision. You haven't destroyed anything. You've just delayed the inevitable." "Maybe, but you won't be around to see it." Harrison's eyes flickered past Ethan to where Lydia had appeared in the doorway. Something in his expression changed, the rage giving way to something colder, more calculating. "Thomas didn't suffer," he said quietly. "In case you were wondering, the men I sent were professionals. He was dead before he knew what was happening. Margaret, too. Quick and clean." "Don't," Lydia said, her voice shaking with fury. "Don't you dare talk about them." "They were innocent, of course, completely innocent. But that's the thing about innocence. It doesn't protect you from the consequences of other people's choices." Harrison's smile was grotesque, blood staining his teeth. "You made a choice, Miss Moore. You chose to be a hero, and your brother paid the price." Something snapped inside Lydia. She crossed the room in 3 steps, grabbed Harrison by his wounded shoulder, and squeezed until he screamed. "My brother was worth 100 of you," she said, her voice low and deadly. "He was kind and good and decent, everything you'll never be. And you took him from me. You took him because I was doing the right thing, because I refused to be complicit in your crimes." "Lydia," Ethan said softly, "I want you to remember something, Harrison Webb. I want you to remember it every day for the rest of your miserable life." She leaned close, her face inches from his. "You lost. You lost to a bookkeeper, a woman you thought was beneath your notice. I found your secrets, I exposed your crimes, and I watched your empire fall. That's my victory. That's my justice. And nothing you say or do will ever take it away from me." She released him, stepping back as Ethan moved forward to bind Harrison's hands. The fire was spreading faster now, the heat becoming unbearable. They had minutes at most before the whole structure collapsed. "Time to go," Daniel said from the doorway. "This place is coming down." They dragged Harrison out of the cabin and into the clearing, where the mountain air was thick with smoke but mercifully cooler. Behind them, flames engulfed the structure, consuming the refuge that Harrison Webb had built for himself. Years of planning, years of preparation, reduced to ash in a matter of minutes, just like his empire. The ride back to civilization was long and quiet. Harrison slumped in his saddle, bound and bleeding, his earlier defiance replaced by a hollow silence. Whatever fight had been left in him had died with the cabin, burned away along with his final hopes of escape. They reached Sacramento the next morning, where Captain Morrison and a squad of federal marshals were waiting. The captain's face was a mixture of relief and exasperation as they handed over their prisoner. "You could have gotten yourselves killed," he said. "But we didn't," Lydia replied, "and now it's truly over." Morrison looked at Harrison Webb, then back at Lydia. "Yes," he said quietly. "I suppose it is." The trial began 3 weeks later. Harrison Webb stood before a federal judge, charged with fraud, conspiracy, and 4 counts of murder. Thomas Moore, Margaret Moore, and 2 witnesses who had been silenced before they could testify. Senator Morrison, Judge Patterson, and 8 other men faced similar charges in separate courtrooms. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimony damning. One by one, the architects of the Pacific Union Holdings conspiracy were convicted and sentenced to prison terms ranging from 20 years to life. Harrison received the harshest sentence of all: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, to be served in a federal penitentiary far from California and the empire he had once commanded. As the judge pronounced the verdict, Harrison's face remained empty, his eyes fixed on some distant point that only he could see. Lydia watched from the gallery, Ethan's hand warm in hers. She had expected to feel satisfaction, maybe even joy. Instead, she felt only a profound weariness, a sense of having carried a weight for so long that she no longer remembered what it felt like to be unburdened. "How do you feel?" Ethan asked as they left the courthouse. "Empty," she admitted. "I thought it would feel different. I thought watching him get what he deserved would make me happy." "And it doesn't?" "It makes me relieved. Grateful. But happy?" She shook her head. "Thomas is still dead. Margaret is still dead. No verdict can change that. No amount of justice can bring them back." Ethan pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders, as they walked down the courthouse steps. "No," he agreed. "It can't. But it can make sure their deaths meant something, that the men who took them can never hurt anyone else." "Is that enough?" "It has to be, because it's all we have." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the crowd of reporters and onlookers that had gathered outside the courthouse. Somewhere in that crowd, Marcus Webb was giving interviews, explaining the story that had brought down an empire. William Collins stood nearby, basking in the attention that came with publishing the scoop of the decade. But Lydia felt no connection to any of it. The spotlight, the attention, the recognition, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the man beside her, the life waiting for them in the mountains, and the future they had fought so hard to earn. "Take me home," she said softly. "Home?" "Your ranch. Our ranch." She looked up at him, and for the first time in months, something like peace settled over her features. "I want to go home, Ethan. I want to leave all of this behind and start the life you promised me." He smiled, and the warmth in his eyes made her heart ache with love. Then let's go. There's nothing keeping us here anymore. They walked away from the courthouse, away from the city, away from everything that had defined their lives for the past terrible weeks. Behind them, justice had been served. Ahead of them, a new chapter was waiting to be written. And for the first time since she had uncovered the secrets that changed everything, Lydia Moore allowed herself to believe that the ending might actually be happy. The road back to the ranch felt different than it had on the way out. When Ethan had last traveled this path, he had been a man running toward danger, driven by a sense of duty and a connection he couldn't yet name. Now, riding beside Lydia through the golden hills of California, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever: contentment. The deep, bone-settling peace of a man who had found his purpose and fulfilled it. Lydia rode beside him in comfortable silence, her face turned toward the horizon where the mountains rose purple and distant against the autumn sky. The bruises had long since faded from her skin, though Ethan knew that some wounds took longer to heal than others. But there was color in her cheeks now, strength in the way she held herself. And when she caught him watching her, her smile was unguarded and real. "What are you looking at?" she asked. "Just making sure you're still there, that this isn't some fever dream I'm going to wake up from. If it's a dream, don't wake me up." She reached across the space between their horses and took his hand. "I'm exactly where I want to be." The ranch appeared as the sun touched the western peaks, casting long shadows across the valley floor. It looked the same as when they had left it: the weathered house, the sturdy barn, the corrals where a handful of cattle waited for their master's return. But to Ethan, everything about it felt new. The house was no longer just a shelter. It was a home waiting to be filled. The barn was no longer just storage. It was the foundation of a life they would build together. "It's beautiful," Lydia breathed, seeing it for the first time in daylight, without the fog of pain and terror that had clouded her arrival months before. "Ethan, it's absolutely beautiful. It's simple, nothing fancy." "I don't want fancy. I've had fancy offices, fancy lies, fancy men who smiled while they planned to destroy me." She looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I want honest. I want real. I want this." They dismounted in front of the house, and Ethan helped her carry their few belongings inside. The interior was dusty from weeks of neglect, cobwebs gathering in the corners, a fine layer of grit covering every surface. But beneath the neglect, the bones of the house were solid, good timber, careful craftsmanship, the work of a man who had built something to last. "It needs cleaning," Lydia said, running her finger along a windowsill, "and new curtains, and probably a fresh coat of paint in at least 3 rooms." "You don't have to." "I want to." She turned to face him, determination written across her features. "This is my home now too, Ethan. I want to make it ours. I want to put my mark on it, make it something we created together." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, feeling her heart beat against his chest. "Then we'll do it together. Every repair, every improvement, every change you want to make. We'll build something new out of something old. Like us." Exactly like us. The first weeks were filled with simple, honest work. They rose before dawn each day, falling into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Ethan handled the heavy labor, repairing fences, tending to the cattle, hauling water from the well that fed the house. Lydia threw herself into transforming the interior, scrubbing floors until they gleamed, hanging new curtains that caught the morning light, turning the spare room into a space that felt welcoming rather than abandoned. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one over the mountains. Sometimes they talked about the future they were building, about the past they were leaving behind, about dreams they had never dared to speak aloud before. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence. "I never asked," Lydia said one evening, breaking a long but peaceful quiet. "What made you stop that day? On the road, when you found me? What made you decide to help instead of riding past?" Ethan considered the question. It was something he had wondered himself, in the early days before he understood what Lydia would come to mean to him. "I've asked myself that 100 times, he admitted. Part of it was simple decency. I couldn't leave someone to die when I had the power to help. But there was something else too, something I felt when I saw you lying there, broken, but still fighting to survive. What? Recognition, maybe. I saw someone who refused to give up, even when every logical reason said she should. Someone who had been beaten down by the world but wouldn't stay down. He reached for her hand. I saw someone worth saving. And if I hadn't been worth it, if I'd turned out to be everything Harrison claimed I was, then I would have been wrong, but I would have made the same choice. He lifted her hand to his lips. Some gambles are worth taking, Lydia. You were the best one I ever made. She moved closer to him, resting her head against his shoulder. I was so afraid of you at first. So certain you were just another man who would hurt me, use me, throw me away when I was no longer useful. I know. But you never did. Even when helping me put your life in danger, even when it would have been easier to turn me in and collect the reward, you stayed. You fought for me. She looked up at him, her eyes luminous in the starlight. No one has ever done that before. No one has ever made me feel like I was worth fighting for. You are. You always have been. The world just failed to notice. You noticed. I noticed. He kissed her forehead softly. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt it again. Autumn deepened into winter, and the ranch transformed along with the seasons. The cattle were moved to winter pasture, their coats growing thick against the cold. Snow dusted the mountain peaks and crept down into the valleys, turning the landscape into a study in white and gray. The house became a haven against the chill, its fireplace burning bright, its rooms filled with warmth and the sound of voices that had grown comfortable with each other. Marcus Webb visited in early December, bringing news from San Francisco. The trials were complete now, all the conspirators convicted and sentenced. Harrison Webb remained in federal custody, transferred to a prison in the East where he would spend the rest of his days. The Pacific Union Holdings Company had been dissolved, its assets distributed to the investors who had been defrauded, its name struck from every registry and record. It's really over, Marcus said, accepting a cup of coffee from Lydia. Everything Harrison built, everything he schemed and killed for, it's all gone, as if it never existed. And you? Lydia asked. What will you do now? I've accepted a position at the Sacramento Bee. They want me to lead their investigative department, find other stories like this one, other secrets that powerful men are trying to hide. He smiled, and there was genuine peace in his expression. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing what I was meant to do, like I'm finally free of my brother's shadow. You always were free, Ethan said. You just needed to believe it. Marcus stayed for 3 days, helping with repairs, sharing meals, becoming part of the small community that was forming around the ranch. Daniel Hawkins visited too, bringing his wife, Mary, and their 2 children, filling the house with laughter and chaos that neither Ethan nor Lydia had realized they were missing. This is what I wanted, Lydia said one night, after the guests had gone and the house had settled into peaceful quiet. This is what I dreamed about when I was a little girl, before life taught me to expect less. A home, a family, people who care about each other. We're building it, Ethan said. Every day we're building it. I know, and it terrifies me. He looked at her in surprise. Terrifies you? Because I've learned that good things can be taken away, that happiness can be destroyed in an instant by men with power and no conscience. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly vulnerable despite the warmth of the fire. What if something happens? What if someone comes to take this from us? Ethan crossed to her, taking her hands in his. Listen to me. The men who wanted to hurt you are gone. Harrison is in prison. His associates are in prison. There's no one left to threaten us. And even if there was, even if someone new came along with some new scheme or some new grudge, we would face them together, just like we faced Harrison, just like we faced everything else. He cupped her face in his hands. I can't promise you that nothing bad will ever happen. I can't promise you a life without risk or pain or loss, but I can promise you this. Whatever comes, you won't face it alone. Not ever again. She searched his eyes, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that his words were empty. She found none. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. More than I knew it was possible to love anyone. Then let's stop being afraid. She took a deep breath. Let's stop waiting for the other shoe to drop and just live. Really live. Build the life we talked about. have the family we dreamed about. Let's be happy, Ethan. Genuinely, completely happy. Is that what you want? It's all I want. It's all I've ever wanted. He kissed her then, slow and tender, a promise sealed with touch rather than words. And when they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. Then that's what we'll do, he said. Starting right now. Spring came early that year, melting the snow from the mountains and filling the valley with wildflowers. Lydia stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Her hand rested on her stomach, feeling the flutter of movement that had become familiar over the past few months. New life growing inside her, a future taking shape. Ethan appeared beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He handed one to her and then stood close, his arm around her waist, his warmth a comfort against the morning chill. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Nervous, excited, terrified. She laughed softly. "All at once." "That seems about right. Do you think I'll be a good mother?" "I think you'll be an amazing mother. The kind of mother who fights for her children, who protects them, who teaches them that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it." He kissed her temple. "Our child is going to be the luckiest kid in California." "Our child." She said the words slowly, savoring them. "I still can't believe it's real." "Believe it. In a few months, we'll have a crying, screaming, demanding little person who keeps us up all night and drives us crazy." He grinned. "I can't wait." The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Ethan built a cradle from oak wood, sanding each piece until it was smooth as silk. Lydia sewed blankets and tiny clothes, her fingers remembering skills her mother had taught her years before. Mrs. Chen sent a package from San Francisco, herbs for health and good fortune, along with a letter written in her careful hand, wishing them joy in their growing family. Marcus visited again in midsummer, bringing news from the outside world. The story of Pacific Union Holdings had faded from the headlines, replaced by newer scandals and fresher outrages. But its impact lingered. Reforms were being passed in Sacramento, laws designed to prevent the kind of fraud that Harrison Webb had perfected. Investigators were looking more closely at other companies, other powerful men, other empires built on lies. "You started something," Marcus told Lydia. "Something bigger than you realize. Because of what you did, people are paying attention. They're demanding accountability. They're refusing to accept that wealth and power place a man above the law." "I didn't do it alone." "No. But you did it first. You had the courage to speak up when everyone else was silent. That matters. That will always matter." The baby came in late August, on a night when the moon hung full and bright over the mountains. Lydia labored for 12 hours, supported by Mary Hawkins and a midwife from Pine Hollow. Ethan waited on the porch, pacing back and forth, wearing a path in the wooden boards. When the cry finally came, thin and high and absolutely perfect, he burst through the door to find Lydia exhausted but radiant, a small bundle in her arms. "It's a girl," she said, her voice breaking. "Ethan, we have a daughter." He crossed to the bed, his legs suddenly unsteady, and looked down at the face of his child. She was tiny, red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and her mother's blue eyes. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Hello," he whispered, reaching out to touch her miniature hand. Her fingers closed around his, impossibly small, impossibly strong. "Hello, little one." "I want to name her after my brother," Lydia said. "Thomasina. Tommy for short." "Thomasina Cole." Ethan tested the name, feeling the weight of it. "It's perfect." "She's perfect." Lydia looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "We made something perfect, Ethan. After everything we went through, all the pain and the loss and the fear, we made something beautiful. We did." He sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around his wife, his daughter cradled between them. "And we're going to give her the life we dreamed about, the life we fought for. A life without fear. A life filled with love." They sat together as the sun rose over the mountains, a family born from tragedy and triumph, from courage and compassion. Outside, the ranch spread out before them, 200 acres of hard-won land, a house built with determination, a future limited only by the scope of their dreams. The years that followed were kind. Tommy grew from a squalling infant into a laughing toddler, then into a spirited child who inherited her mother's stubbornness and her father's quiet strength. She learned to ride almost before she learned to walk, scrambling onto ponies and galloping across the pastures with fearless joy. She asked endless questions about everything, the stars, the cattle, the way the world worked, and Lydia and Ethan answered each one with patience and love. A second child came 2 years after the first, a boy they named Thomas, after Lydia's brother, without the feminine addition. He was quieter than his sister, more contemplative, with a talent for drawing that emerged almost as soon as he could hold a pencil. The two children were as different as night and day, but they adored each other with a fierce, protective devotion that reminded Lydia of herself and the brother she had lost. The ranch prospered. Ethan expanded the herd, added new buildings, hired hands to help with work that had grown beyond what one man could manage. Lydia kept the books, her training as an accountant finally put to use that brought joy rather than pain. They were comfortable, if not wealthy, secure in a way that neither had ever expected to be. And they were happy. Genuinely, completely happy. Visitors came and went over the years. Marcus Webb, now a renowned investigative journalist, stopped by whenever his work brought him west. Daniel and Mary Hawkins became family in everything but blood, their children growing up alongside Tommy and Thomas, creating bonds that would last a lifetime. Mrs. Chen made the journey once, despite her advancing age, and spent a week teaching Lydia the secrets of Chinese cooking while Tommy and Thomas sat at her feet, enchanted by her stories. "You have done well," Mrs. Chen said on her last evening at the ranch, watching the sunset from the porch. "Better than I hoped when I first took you in. I couldn't have done it without you, without everyone who helped us. You would have found a way. You have the spirit." The old woman smiled. "But it is good not to walk alone. It is good to have people who stand with you." "Yes," Lydia agreed. "It is." 10 years after Harrison Webb was sentenced to prison, a letter arrived at the ranch. Lydia found it in the mailbox during one of her weekly trips to Pine Hollow. The envelope was plain, unmarked except for her name, written in a hand she didn't recognize. Inside was a single page covered in cramped, careful script. She read it standing in the middle of the general store, the world around her fading to nothing. The letter was from Harrison Webb. He had written to tell her that he was dying. Cancer, the doctor said, spread too far to treat. He had weeks left, maybe less, and he wanted her to know that he had spent the last decade thinking about her, about what she had done, about what she had cost him, about the empire she had destroyed. "At first I hated you," the letter read. "I dreamed of revenge, of escape, of finding a way to make you suffer as I suffered. But time has a way of changing perspective. I am an old man now, alone and forgotten, watching my life drain away in a prison cell. And I find that the hatred has faded, replaced by something I never expected. Respect. You were braver than I gave you credit for. Stronger than I believed possible. You stood against power and wealth and influence, against everything the world says is invincible, and you won. Not because you were lucky or because circumstances favored you, because you refused to surrender. Because you believed that truth mattered more than safety, more than comfort, more than your own survival. I was wrong about many things in my life, but I was most wrong about you. I do not ask for forgiveness. I do not deserve it, and I would not believe it if you offered. But I wanted you to know, before I die, that the girl I dismissed as insignificant turned out to be the most formidable opponent I ever faced. And in some strange way, I am grateful. The world needs people like you, Lydia Moore. People who refuse to accept injustice. People who fight even when the odds are impossible. I spent my life trying to be powerful. You taught me that true power has nothing to do with money or influence. It has to do with the willingness to stand up when everyone else is sitting down. Goodbye. Live well, and do not waste a single moment mourning me. I made my choices, and I accept their consequences. Harrison Webb. Lydia stood holding the letter for a long time, her hands trembling, her mind struggling to process what she had read. Harrison Webb, the man who had killed her brother, destroyed her life, hunted her across California, asking for nothing. offering something she had never expected to receive: acknowledgement. She showed the letter to Ethan that evening after the children were in bed. He read it in silence, his expression unreadable. "How do you feel?" he asked finally. "I don't know," she admitted. "Confused, angry, sad maybe." She shook her head. "I spent so long hating him, so long seeing him as a monster, a villain, the source of all my pain. And now he's dying, and he's apologizing, praising me. I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it. You don't owe him forgiveness or closure or any kind of response." "I know." She took the letter back, folding it carefully. "But somehow, reading this, knowing that he spent his last years thinking about what happened, it feels like something has finally ended, something I didn't even realize was still open. Closure? Maybe. Or just acceptance. Acceptance that what happened, happened. That it can't be changed. That the only thing I can control is how I move forward." She looked at him, and her eyes were clear. "I choose to move forward with you. With our children. With the life we've built. Harrison Webb doesn't get any more of my attention or my energy. He's taken enough already." Ethan pulled her close. "That's my Lydia." "That's our Lydia," she corrected. "Yours and mine and Tommy's and Thomas's. The Lydia who belongs here, in this house, with this family. Not the Lydia who was running for her life 10 years ago." "They're the same person." "No." She shook her head. "That Lydia was broken and afraid and alone. This Lydia is whole, because you helped put the pieces back together." Harrison Webb died 3 weeks later. Lydia learned of his passing through a brief notice in the Sacramento Bee, a few lines noting that the disgraced businessman had succumbed to illness in federal custody. There was no funeral, no memorial, no one to mourn him. The empire he had built was long gone. His name remembered only as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition. Lydia did not attend. She did not mourn, but she did, in her own quiet way, acknowledge his passing. She walked to the small hill behind the ranch house where she had planted a garden in memory of Thomas and Margaret. Their graves were far away, in a Sacramento cemetery, but this garden was her way of keeping them close. She knelt among the flowers and spoke to them as she did every week, telling them about the children, about the ranch, about the small joys and challenges of the life she was building. "It's over," she said finally, "really over. The man who killed you is dead. The men who helped him are in prison. The wrong that was done to you has been acknowledged and punished." She paused, her throat tight with emotion. "I wish you could see what I've built. I wish you could meet your niece and nephew, see the home Ethan and I have created. I think you would be proud." The wind stirred the flowers, carrying their scent across the hillside. Lydia closed her eyes and imagined her brother standing beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his voice warm and loving. "You did good, little sister. I always knew you would." "I love you," she whispered. "I'll never stop loving you." Then she rose, brushed the dirt from her knees, and walked back down the hill to where her family was waiting. The years continued to pass. Tommy grew into a young woman of remarkable strength and compassion, attending school in Sacramento and returning to the ranch with dreams of becoming a doctor. Thomas developed into a talented artist, his drawings capturing the beauty of the California landscape with skill that attracted attention from galleries across the state. Both children knew the story of their parents' past, the danger they had faced, the battles they had fought, the love that had sustained them through impossible odds. "Tell us again," they would say on winter evenings, gathered around the fireplace. "Tell us how you met. Tell us about the bad men and how you stopped them." And Lydia and Ethan would tell them. Not the sanitized version, not a fairy tale with the rough edges smoothed away. The real story, with all its fear and pain and uncertainty. Because they wanted their children to understand that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the decision to act despite fear. It was the choice to stand up for what was right, even when standing up came with a terrible cost. "Your mother is the bravest person I've ever known," Ethan would say. "She faced down an empire with nothing but the truth and her own determination. And she won." "We won," Lydia would correct, "because I didn't do it alone. Because your father chose to stand with me when he had every reason to walk away." "Why?" Tommy asked once, when she was old enough to understand the weight of the question. Why did you risk everything for a stranger? You didn't know Mom. You didn't owe her anything. Ethan considered the question carefully before answering. Because some things are worth risking everything for. Justice, truth, love. He looked at Lydia, and his eyes were bright with emotion. Because when you see someone who refuses to surrender, someone who keeps fighting even when hope is gone, you have a choice. You can watch from the sidelines, safe and uninvolved, or you can join the fight and become part of something bigger than yourself. And you chose to join. I chose to join, and it was the best choice I ever made. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Ethan and Lydia renewed their vows on the porch of the ranch house, surrounded by family and friends. Marcus Webb performed the ceremony, his journalist's eloquence put to romantic use. Daniel and Mary Hawkins stood as witnesses, their own children now grown, the bonds between the two families stronger than ever. 20 years ago, Marcus said, addressing the gathered crowd, two strangers met on a California road. One was running for her life. The other chose to stand in the way of her pursuers. Neither of them knew what that choice would lead to. The danger they would face, the battles they would fight, the love that would grow between them. He paused, looking at the couple before him. I had the privilege of watching that love develop. I saw Ethan risk his life for a woman he barely knew. I saw Lydia find the strength to keep fighting even when everything seemed lost. And I saw both of them refuse to give up on each other, on justice, on the belief that truth and courage can triumph over power and corruption. Today, we celebrate not just a marriage, but a partnership. Two people who have proven that love is not a passive emotion, but an active choice. A choice to stand together. A choice to fight together. A choice to build a life that neither of them could have imagined when they first met on that dusty road. He turned to Ethan. Do you, Ethan Cole, choose to continue walking this road with Lydia? To stand with her through whatever challenges lie ahead? To love her with the same courage and commitment that you have shown for the past 20 years? I do, Ethan said, his voice steady. Today and always. Marcus turned to Lydia. And do you, Lydia Moore Cole, choose to continue walking this road with Ethan? To stand with him through whatever challenges lie ahead? To love him with the same courage and commitment that you have shown for the past 20 years? I do, Lydia said, tears streaming down her face. Today and always. Then by the power vested in me by the state of California and by the bonds of friendship that tie us all together, I reaffirm your marriage. May the next 20 years be as full of love and courage as the first. The crowd cheered. Tommy and Thomas embraced their parents. And as the sun set over the California mountains, Ethan and Lydia Cole stood together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the family they had created, looking out at a future bright with possibility. We made it, Lydia whispered. We did. Ethan pulled her close. And we'll keep making it, every day, for as long as we have. Is that a promise? It's a guarantee. He kissed her softly. The road led us here, Lydia, and I wouldn't change a single step. She leaned into him, feeling his heartbeat against her own, feeling the warmth of his love surrounding her like a shelter against any storm. Neither would I, she said. Neither would I. And as the stars emerged over the mountains and the sounds of celebration filled the air, Lydia Moore Cole finally understood that the road she had traveled, with all its pain and danger and loss, had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Home. Not just a house or a ranch or a piece of land. Home was Ethan's arms around her. Home was her children's laughter. Home was the knowledge that she was loved, valued, protected, not because she was weak, but because she had proven herself strong. The road had been long and hard and terrifying, but it had brought her here, to this moment, to this life, to this love, and that made every step worth taking.